A woman sat next to a stranger on a plane, and a single whispered word from him rewrote the course of her entire existence. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The boarding call for Flight 2781 to Chicago echoed through the terminal as Eliza Morgan rushed toward the gate, her carry-on bag bouncing awkwardly against her hip. She was the last to board, breathless and flustered, her carefully applied makeup beginning to smudge beneath anxious sweat. The flight attendant barely concealed her annoyance as she scanned Eliza's crumpled boarding pass. "Cutting it close, Ms. Morgan," she said with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry," Eliza mumbled, though she wasn't entirely sure why she was apologizing. Her connecting flight had been delayed, and she'd sprinted through the airport to make this one. It wasn't her fault, but somehow, she always found herself saying sorry. The cabin was already full. Passengers settled into their seats with headphones on or noses buried in books or screens. Eliza made her way down the narrow aisle, scanning the row numbers. 27A. Window seat, at least there was that small mercy. But as she approached her row, her heart sank. The middle and aisle seats were already occupied. The aisle seat held a businessman typing furiously on his laptop, seemingly unaware of her presence until she cleared her throat. He sighed dramatically, closed his computer with exaggerated care, and stood to let her pass without a word or a glance in her direction. As Eliza squeezed past him, she got her first look at the person who would be sharing her personal space for the next 3 hours. A man in his mid-50s sat in the middle seat, his posture unnaturally straight, hands resting on his knees. He wore a crisp gray suit that looked expensive but somehow timeless, as if fashion trends had no bearing on his choices. His silver hair was cut short and neat, and when he turned to look at her, Eliza was struck by eyes so pale blue they seemed almost colorless. "I'm in the window," she said unnecessarily, gesturing awkwardly. The man nodded and rose smoothly to his feet, stepping into the aisle to let her pass. There was something unusual about his movements, too fluid, too precise, as if each gesture had been choreographed. As Eliza settled into her seat, she noticed that he smelled faintly of something she couldn't quite place. Not cologne or aftershave, but something more elemental, like ozone before a storm. "Thank you," she murmured as he sat back down beside her. He turned those unsettling pale eyes to her and inclined his head slightly. "You're welcome, Eliza." She froze, her hand halfway to the seatbelt. "How do you know my name?" The man's expression didn't change. "Your boarding pass," he said, nodding toward the paper still clutched in her hand. "I couldn't help but notice." "Oh." Eliza felt foolish for her alarm. Of course, that was it. She tucked the boarding pass into the seat pocket and fastened her seatbelt, trying to dismiss the unease that had settled in her stomach. She was being ridiculous. The stress of the past few weeks was making her paranoid. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration, and Eliza forced herself to pay attention, though she'd seen it countless times before. Anything to avoid awkward small talk with the stranger beside her. The businessman on the aisle had already put his headphones back on and reopened his laptop, creating a wall between himself and the world. As the plane began to taxi, Eliza gazed out the window at the gray April sky. Chicago. She'd never imagined she'd be returning there, not after what had happened. 15 years was a long time to stay away from your hometown, but not long enough to forget. Never long enough for that. The plane accelerated down the runway, pressing Eliza back into her seat. She gripped the armrests, her knuckles whitening. She'd never enjoyed takeoff, that moment of surrendering control completely to forces beyond her understanding. Much like returning to Chicago, she thought grimly. "It won't be as bad as you fear," said the man beside her, his voice low and melodious. Eliza turned to him, startled. "Excuse me?" "The turbulence," he clarified, gesturing toward the cloudy sky. The forecast suggests we'll have a smooth flight despite the appearance of the clouds." "Oh." Eliza nodded, unsure why his comment had unsettled her. "That's good to know." The man smiled, a small, controlled movement that seemed practiced rather than natural. Knowledge often provides comfort in uncertain situations. There was something odd about the way he spoke, formal and precise, as if English were not his first language, though his accent was perfectly neutral. Eliza nodded politely and turned back to the window, hoping he'd take the hint that she wasn't in the mood for conversation. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. The flight attendants began their drink service, moving slowly down the aisle with their cart. Eliza took out her e-reader, hoping to lose herself in someone else's story for the duration of the flight. "What are you reading?" the man asked, his eyes on her device. Eliza suppressed a sigh. So much for avoiding conversation. "The ocean at the end of the lane," she replied. "Neil Gaiman." "Ah." The man nodded. "A story about memory and the past, about returning to places we've left behind and confronting what waits there." Eliza stared at him. It was an uncomfortably apt description, both of the book and her current situation. "You've read it?" "I've read many things," he said, which wasn't really an answer. "You're returning home after a long absence." It wasn't a question, but Eliza found herself responding anyway. "Yes, Chicago was home once." "And what draws you back after so much time away?" Eliza hesitated. Normally, she would deflect such a personal question from a stranger, but something about this man made her want to answer truthfully. "My father is dying." The words hung in the air between them, stark and painful. She hadn't said them aloud before, not even to herself. "My father is dying." The doctors had given him weeks, maybe a month. Pancreatic cancer, discovered too late. By the time the symptoms had become impossible to ignore, it had already spread to his liver and lungs. "I'm sorry," the man said, and unlike most people who offered those words, he seemed to genuinely mean them. "That must be difficult, especially given your complicated relationship." Eliza's head snapped up. "What do you mean by that?" The man appeared untroubled by her sharp tone. 15 years is a long time to stay away if the relationship were simple. She couldn't argue with that logic, though it still felt presumptuous. "It's complicated," she admitted finally. "We haven't spoken in years. And yet you're going to him now." "He asked for me." Eliza looked down at her hands, at the bitten nails she could never break the habit of chewing when anxious. "My stepmother called. She said he's been asking for me, that he has something important to tell me before—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The man nodded as if she had. Final words often carry weight far beyond their syllables. "I suppose." Eliza turned to look out the window again, at the endless expanse of clouds below. What could her father possibly have to say to her after all this time? What secrets could be so important that they could only be revealed on his deathbed? The flight attendant arrived with the drink cart, interrupting her thoughts. "Something to drink?" she asked, her professional smile firmly in place. "Just water, please," Eliza said. "Nothing for me, thank you," the man beside her responded. The flight attendant handed Eliza a plastic cup of water and a napkin, then moved on to the next row. Eliza took a sip, wishing it were something stronger. The thought of seeing her father again after so many years filled her with a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't quite untangle. Anger, certainly. Resentment. But also a strange, unwelcome longing that she'd thought she'd excised long ago. "Do you believe in fate, Eliza?" the man asked suddenly. The question was so unexpected that Eliza nearly choked on her water. What? Fate. Destiny. The idea that some events are predetermined, that certain meetings are not by chance. "No," Eliza said firmly. "I believe we make our own choices, and we live with the consequences." The man smiled, that strange mechanical smile again. An admirable philosophy. But what if I told you that our meeting today was not coincidental? That I am here specifically to speak with you? A chill ran down Eliza's spine. She glanced around the cabin, suddenly aware of how trapped she was, 30,000 feet above the earth with nowhere to go. The businessman on the aisle was absorbed in his work, oblivious to the conversation beside him. No help there. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Nathaniel," he replied. "And I have a message for you, Eliza Morgan. About your father, about what happened 15 years ago, and about what awaits you in Chicago." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. How could you possibly know anything about my father, or about what happened? Nathaniel's pale eyes seemed to look through her rather than at her. "I know that on the night of April 17th, 15 years ago, your mother disappeared without a trace. I know that your father was the primary suspect, though no charges were ever filed due to lack of evidence. I know that you left home the day after your 18th birthday and never returned because you believed he was guilty." Eliza felt lightheaded, the cabin seeming to spin around her. No one knew all those details. She had never spoken about that night to anyone, not even to her closest friends. "Who are you?" she repeated, her voice shaking now. "Are you with the police? A private investigator?" "Neither," Nathaniel said calmly. "I am simply someone who has been watching, and who believes you deserve to know the truth before it's too late." "The truth about what?" Nathaniel leaned closer, his voice dropping so low that Eliza had to strain to hear him over the drone of the engines. "Your mother is alive, Eliza." The world seemed to stop. 4 words, spoken softly by a stranger on a plane, and everything Eliza thought she knew about her life crumbled to dust. Your mother is alive. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. She'd mourned her mother, had stood at the memorial service staring at an empty casket because they'd never found a body. She'd spent years in therapy trying to come to terms with her loss, with the horrible suspicion that her own father was responsible. "That's not funny," she managed to say, her throat tight with shock and anger. "That's a cruel thing to say to someone." "I'm not being cruel," Nathaniel replied, his expression solemn. "I'm telling you the truth. Your mother didn't die that night. She left, yes, but not in the way you think. And your father has been protecting you from that truth all these years." "Protecting me?" Eliza almost laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "He barely spoke to me after she disappeared. He remarried less than a year later. He let me believe—" She cut herself off, aware that her voice had risen and the businessman was glancing at them with irritation. "He let you believe what you needed to believe," Nathaniel said, "because the truth was far more dangerous." "What truth?" Eliza demanded, no longer caring who heard. "Who are you, and how do you know these things?" Nathaniel reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a small, weathered envelope. "This contains the address where you can find your mother," he said, holding it out to her. "After you've seen your father, after you've heard what he has to tell you, go to this place. But be careful. There are people who have spent 15 years making sure this reunion never happens, and they won't stop now." Eliza stared at the envelope, unable to make herself take it. "This is insane," she whispered. "I don't know you. I have no reason to believe anything you're saying." "The ring," Nathaniel said quietly. "The one you wear on a chain around your neck, hidden beneath your blouse. Your mother's wedding ring, which you found in your father's study the night after she disappeared, tucked inside a book of poetry. You took it, and you've kept it all these years, never telling anyone, not even the police." Eliza's hand flew to her chest, where beneath her clothing lay the simple gold band on a delicate chain. No one knew about the ring. No one. With trembling fingers, she took the envelope from Nathaniel's outstretched hand. "There's one more thing you need to know," he said, his voice so low now that it was barely a breath against her ear. He leaned closer, and whispered a single word. Eliza's blood turned to ice in her veins. The world around her, the plane, the other passengers, even the stranger beside her, seemed to recede, becoming distant and unreal. That word, that impossible word that no one could know. "How?" she whispered. But when she turned to look at Nathaniel, the question died on her lips. The middle seat was empty. Nathaniel was gone. Eliza blinked, certain she must be hallucinating. The middle seat was empty, the seatbelt neatly fastened across it as if no one had been sitting there at all. She glanced frantically at the businessman in the aisle seat who was still absorbed in his spreadsheets. "Excuse me," she said, tapping his shoulder. He removed one earbud with obvious reluctance. "The man who was sitting here, did you see where he went?" The businessman frowned. "What man?" "The man in the gray suit. He was sitting right here." Eliza pointed at the empty middle seat, hearing the edge of hysteria in her voice. The businessman's frown deepened. "Lady, that seat's been empty since takeoff. You've been alone in this row except for me." "That's not possible," Eliza insisted. "We were just talking. He gave me—" She looked down at her hand, still clutching the weathered envelope Nathaniel had given her. At least that was real. The businessman shrugged, clearly losing interest in the conversation. "Maybe you dozed off and had a dream. Happens to me all the time on flights." He replaced his earbud, effectively ending the discussion. Eliza sat back, her mind racing. Had she imagined the entire encounter? Was she so stressed about seeing her father again that she'd hallucinated a strange man telling her that her mother was alive? She looked at the envelope in her hand, turning it over. It was addressed simply to E.M. in an elegant, old-fashioned script. She tore it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing an address in Evanston, a suburb north of Chicago that she remembered well from her childhood. Below the address were the words, "Tuesday, 8 p.m. Come alone." Today was Sunday. Whatever was supposed to happen at this address would take place in 2 days. Eliza stared at the paper, trying to make sense of it all. If she'd hallucinated Nathaniel, where had this envelope come from? And if he was real, how had he disappeared from a moving plane? The remainder of the flight passed in a blur. Eliza alternated between convincing herself she'd suffered some kind of stress-induced delusion and frantically searching the cabin for any sign of the silver-haired man. She saw no one matching his description, and when she discreetly asked a flight attendant if a passenger had changed seats during the flight, the woman assured her that everyone had remained where they were assigned. By the time the plane touched down at O'Hare, Eliza was exhausted and confused, her head pounding with questions that had no logical answers. She shuffled off the plane with the other passengers, clutching her carry-on in one hand and the mysterious envelope in the other. The familiar sights and sounds of O'Hare hit her with unexpected force. She had been 12 years old the first time her father had taken her to meet an arriving flight, explaining how the enormous airport operated, his deep voice full of the enthusiasm he reserved for teaching her new things. Back then, he'd still been her hero. Back then, her mother had still been alive, or at least, that's what she'd always believed. Eliza made her way to the car rental counter, operating on autopilot. She'd reserved a vehicle online before her flight, preferring the freedom of having her own transportation to relying on her stepmother for rides. The thought of being trapped in a car with Diane, making painful small talk while navigating the Chicago traffic, was more than she could bear. The rental agent handed over the keys to a nondescript sedan, and Eliza headed for the parking garage, still feeling as if she were moving through a dream. The April air was cool but not cold as she loaded her luggage into the trunk, a typical spring day in Chicago. It all felt surreally normal, mundane even, given the fact that her entire understanding of her life had just been upended by a man who may or may not have been a figment of her imagination. As she pulled out of the airport and onto the highway toward Oak Park, where her father still lived in the same house she'd grown up in, Eliza found herself checking the rearview mirror more often than necessary. Nathaniel's warning echoed in her mind. There are people who have spent 15 years making sure this reunion never happens. Was someone following her? Every dark sedan, every SUV with tinted windows suddenly seemed suspicious. "Get a grip, Eliza," she muttered to herself. "You're losing it." The drive to Oak Park took less time than she expected, Sunday evening traffic being lighter than the weekday rush she remembered from her youth. All too soon she was turning onto her old street, lined with historic homes set back from the road, their lawns neatly maintained despite the challenge of the early spring weather. And there it was, 1247 Forest Avenue, the two-story Victorian where she'd spent the first 18 years of her life, the house where her mother had disappeared, the house she'd sworn never to enter again. It looked exactly the same, from the wraparound porch to the distinctive turret on the left side, where her bedroom had been. The only difference was the color. Once a cheerful yellow with white trim, it was now painted a subdued gray with black accents. It suited the house's current purpose as a place of grief and endings, Eliza thought bitterly. She parked at the curb and sat staring at the house, unable to make herself get out of the car. What was she doing here? What did she expect to find? Closure? Answers? Forgiveness? None of those things seemed possible, especially now with Nathaniel's impossible claims rattling around in her head. "Your mother is alive." The ring against her chest felt suddenly heavy, the slim gold band a tangible connection to a woman who had vanished from her life so completely that sometimes Eliza struggled to remember her face without the aid of photographs. A movement at the window caught her eye, a shadow passing behind the curtains. Someone had seen her sitting out here, no more delaying the inevitable. Eliza got out of the car and walked up the familiar path to the front door, her carry-on trailing behind her. She'd shipped a larger suitcase ahead, unsure how long she would need to stay. The doctors had said a month at most, but such estimates were notoriously unreliable. Her father might linger for weeks, or he might be gone by tomorrow. The thought brought a confusing mix of emotions, sadness certainly, but also a strange relief at the idea that soon she would no longer have to live with the weight of their estrangement, the questions that had haunted her for 15 years. Before she could ring the bell, the door swung open, revealing Diane Morgan, her stepmother. At 58, Diane was still an attractive woman, her ash-blonde hair now streaked with gray but still styled in the same shoulder-length cut she'd worn when she'd first entered Eliza's life. She wore a simple black dress, as if already in mourning, though her expression brightened somewhat at the sight of her stepdaughter. "Eliza," she said, stepping forward to embrace her. Eliza allowed the hug but didn't return it, her arms hanging awkwardly at her sides. Diane seemed to expect this reaction and didn't comment on it as she stepped back. "You look well. Tired from the flight, I'm sure, but well." "How is he?" Eliza asked, bypassing the small talk. She hadn't seen Diane in 15 years either, but unlike with her father, there was no real animosity between them. Diane had been kind to her during the brief time they'd lived under the same roof, but she'd also been part of what Eliza saw as her father's betrayal, moving on so quickly after her mother's disappearance as if Margaret Morgan had never existed. Diane's expression sobered. "Not good. The pain is difficult to manage even with the hospice medications. He sleeps most of the time now." She stepped aside, gesturing for Eliza to enter. "But he's been asking for you. Whenever he's lucid, he asks if you've arrived yet." Eliza stepped into the foyer, assaulted by memories. The familiar smell of lemon furniture polish and old books. The gleaming hardwood floors that her father had been so proud of, spending weekends refinishing them by hand. The curved staircase leading to the second floor, where her bedroom had been. "I've prepared your old room," Diane said, as if reading her thoughts. "Unless you'd prefer the guest room?" The thought of sleeping in her childhood bedroom surrounded by the ghosts of her past was almost unbearable. "The guest room, please," Eliza said quickly. Diane nodded, unsurprised. "Of course, it's all ready for you." She hesitated, then added, "He's upstairs, in your parents' old room. We converted it once the stairs became too difficult for him. The hospice nurse comes daily, but I handle most of his care." Your parents' old room? The scene of the crime, as Eliza had come to think of it. The room where her mother had last been seen alive, where the police had found signs of a struggle, a broken lamp, blood on the carpet that matched her mother's type. The room where her father had claimed to have slept through whatever had happened to his wife, waking to find her gone without a trace. "Would you like to see him now?" Diane asked gently. "Or would you prefer to settle in first?" Eliza swallowed hard. "I should see him first," she said. After all, that's why she was here. That's all she was here for, to listen to whatever her father needed to tell her, and then to leave. Not to reconcile, not to forgive, just to listen. And then, perhaps, to find out if Nathaniel's impossible claim could possibly be true. Diane led the way up the stairs, her hand trailing lightly along the banister. Eliza followed, each step feeling heavier than the last. At the top of the stairs, Diane turned left toward the master bedroom, and Eliza found herself hesitating again. "Go on," Diane encouraged her. "I'll give you some privacy." Eliza nodded gratefully and approached the partially open door. She could hear the soft beeping of medical equipment within, the low hum of an oxygen machine. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn against the early evening light. A hospital bed had been set up where the king-sized bed she remembered used to be, surrounded by medical equipment. And in the center of it all, propped up against several pillows, was the diminished figure of her father. Robert Morgan had once been an imposing man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a presence that filled a room. The man in the bed was a shadow of that memory, his body wasted by disease, his once thick dark hair now gone, likely from chemotherapy. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but regular. Eliza stood frozen in the doorway, unprepared for the wave of emotion that crashed over her at the sight of him. 15 years of anger and betrayal, 15 years of questions and accusations, and now here he was, already more ghost than man. "Dad?" The word felt foreign on her tongue after so long. Robert's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they found her standing there. Recognition dawned on his gaunt face, followed by a complex mix of emotions, surprise, relief, and something that looked almost like fear. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "You came." She moved to the side of the bed, not taking his outstretched hand but standing close enough that he could see her clearly. "You asked for me," she said simply. "Yes." He closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you years ago." Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. "About Mom?" Robert's eyes snapped open, alarm evident in his gaze. "What do you know about your mother?" The intensity of his reaction startled her. It wasn't the response of a guilty man afraid of being accused, but of someone genuinely frightened by the question. For the first time, Eliza felt a flicker of doubt about the narrative she'd constructed all those years ago. "Nothing," she said carefully. "Just what the police told us. That she disappeared, that there were signs of a struggle, that they suspected—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence, to accuse him directly even after all this time. Robert closed his eyes again, his chest rising and falling rapidly as if the conversation was physically taxing. "The police didn't know anything," he said finally. "No one did, except me. And now it's time you knew, too." He opened his eyes, fixing her with a gaze that, despite his weakened state, held the full force of the intelligence and determination she remembered from her childhood. "Your mother didn't disappear that night, Eliza. She escaped." "Escaped?" Eliza repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. "Escaped from what? From whom?" Robert shifted in the bed, wincing at what must have been considerable pain. "Would you—" He gestured weakly toward the water pitcher on the nightstand. "My throat." Eliza poured him a glass of water, adjusting the straw so he could sip without having to sit up further. She noticed his hands trembling as he reached for it, the skin paper-thin over prominent veins. After he drank, he closed his eyes briefly, his breathing labored. "Perhaps we should continue this later," Eliza suggested, though every fiber of her being wanted, needed, to hear what he had to say. "No," Robert said firmly, opening his eyes again. "No more delays. I've waited too long already." He took another shallow breath. "Your mother was not who you thought she was, Eliza. Not who anyone thought she was." Eliza felt the room tilt slightly, Nathaniel's words on the plane echoing in her mind. "What do you mean?" "Before I met her, before she was Margaret Morgan, your mother worked for a government agency that officially didn't exist." He paused, gauging her reaction. "Something between the CIA and the NSA, but with even less oversight. A program called Cassandra." Eliza almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Her mother, a government agent? Margaret Morgan had been an art history professor at the University of Chicago, a woman who spent her weekends gardening and attending gallery openings. The idea was preposterous. "You don't believe me," Robert observed, his voice flat. "It sounds like something from a bad spy movie," Eliza replied, trying to keep the skepticism from her voice. Her father was dying, possibly delirious. Perhaps this was all some elaborate fiction his failing mind had constructed. "I didn't believe it either at first," Robert admitted. "Not until that night. Not until they came for her." A chill ran through Eliza despite the warmth of the room. Who came for her? Her former colleagues, at least that's what she called them. To me, they looked like hitmen. His voice had dropped to a whisper, forcing Eliza to lean closer. 3 men in suits, with government IDs that looked real enough but probably weren't. They said she had violated her exit agreement, that she had accessed classified files after her retirement. They said they were taking her in for questioning. "And you just let them take her?" Eliza couldn't keep the accusation from her voice. Robert shook his head, a slight movement that seemed to cost him great effort. No, I tried to stop them. That's how the lamp got broken, how her blood got on the carpet. I fought them, Eliza. I broke one man's nose before the other 2 restrained me." He raised his right hand slightly, showing her the back of it. "See this scar? From that night. From trying to save her." Eliza stared at the thin white line across his knuckles, a scar she'd never noticed or questioned. "Then what happened?" "Your mother. She was remarkable, Eliza. So much stronger and more capable than I ever knew. She managed to break free while they were dealing with me. She grabbed the gun from one of them. I didn't even know she knew how to handle a firearm." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She ordered them to back away from me. She was so calm, so controlled. But I could see in her eyes that she knew this was the end of everything." Robert paused, closing his eyes as if seeing the scene play out behind his eyelids. "She told me she loved me, that she loved you more than anything in the world. She said she had to disappear, that if she stayed they would never stop coming, and that you and I would be in danger too. Then she left, taking the gun and one of their phones. The men went after her, of course. I tried to follow, but..." He gestured weakly at his head. "One of them had hit me pretty hard. I was disoriented, bleeding. By the time I made it outside, they were all gone. No sign of your mother. No sign of the men." Eliza's mind was reeling. This story was too fantastical to be believed. And yet, it aligned with what Nathaniel had told her on the plane. "Why didn't you tell the police? Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried to tell the police," Robert said, his voice strengthening with indignation. "They thought I was making it up to cover for killing her myself, and the more I insisted, the more convinced they became of my guilt. There was no evidence of these men, no record of any agency called Cassandra. As for you," his voice softened, "you were 15, Eliza. How could I tell you something like that? Something I barely understood myself. And then, When it became clear that the police suspected me, I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you knew the truth, you might start asking questions. Dangerous questions. Afraid that whoever had come for your mother might come for you too if they thought you knew something. He reached for her hand, and this time Eliza didn't pull away. I thought it was better for you to believe I was guilty than for you to become a target. Eliza's head was spinning. Could this possibly be true? Her mother, a secret agent? Her father, innocent all these years? It seemed impossible. And yet, the night after Mom disappeared, she said slowly, I found her wedding ring in your study, hidden in a book. I thought it was proof that you had done something to her, that you had taken it off her body. Robert's eyes widened. The ring? You found it? When Eliza nodded, he let out a breath that seemed to deflate him further. She left it for you, Eliza. She must have slipped into my study while I was unconscious and hidden it there, knowing you would find it. It was her way of saying goodbye. How could you know that? Because she left something for me, too. With effort, he reached toward the nightstand drawer. In there, the blue envelope. Eliza opened the drawer and found a worn blue envelope, similar to the one Nathaniel had given her on the plane but much older, the edges soft with handling. She opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper, covered in handwriting she recognized instantly as her mother's. The elegant, slightly slanted script that had filled the margins of books and signed countless permission slips throughout her childhood. My dearest Robert, the letter began. If you're reading this, I've had to leave. I'm sorry for the deception, for all the years of lies. I thought I could outrun my past, but it seems it has finally caught up with me. Please know that every moment with you and Eliza has been real. My love for you both is the truest thing in my life. The letter continued, explaining in vague terms that Margaret had been involved in work that she could never discuss, that she had made enemies who would never stop looking for her, and that her only choice now was to disappear completely. I've left my ring for Eliza, the letter read. Please don't tell her about this note or about my past. Let her believe whatever story will cause her the least pain. Someday, if it's safe, I will find a way to contact you both. Until then, know that I am thinking of you every day and that leaving you is the hardest thing I've ever done. All my love, always, Margaret. Eliza looked up from the letter, tears blurring her vision. Why are you showing me this now? Why after all this time? Robert sighed, a rattling sound that worried Eliza with its weakness. Because a week ago, I received this. He gestured again to the drawer, the white envelope, beneath where the blue one was. Eliza reached back into the drawer and found another envelope, this one crisp and new. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address in Evanston, the same address that had been in the envelope Nathaniel gave her on the plane. Tuesday, 8 p.m., it read. Both of you, come alone. I don't understand, Eliza said, looking between the two notes. Who sent this? I don't know, Robert admitted. It arrived with no return address, no note beyond what you see. But I believe it's from your mother. After 15 years? Why now? Robert's gaze drifted to the window, though the curtains were drawn. Because I'm dying, he said simply. Because whatever danger kept her away might be considered less pressing now that I have only weeks to live. Because she wants to see you, to explain herself to you, before it's too late for me to be part of that reunion. Eliza sat back in the chair beside the bed, trying to process everything she'd just learned. Her entire understanding of the past 15 years was being dismantled, piece by piece. Her mother hadn't been murdered. She'd fled to protect her family. Her father wasn't a killer. He was a man who had sacrificed his relationship with his daughter to keep her safe. And Nathaniel? Who was he in all this? How had he known about her mother, about the ring? How had he obtained the same address, the same meeting time? And most perplexing of all, How had he vanished from a moving airplane? "You're going to go, aren't you?" Robert asked, his voice faint but hopeful. "On Tuesday?" Eliza hesitated. Part of her wanted to dismiss this all as an elaborate delusion, to cling to the version of events she'd believed for so long. It was painful, yes, but it was familiar. This new narrative demanded she reconsider everything, that she open herself to hope that could so easily be crushed. "I need time to think," she said finally. It's a lot to take in." "I understand," Robert said, though disappointment shadowed his face. "But time is the one thing I don't have much of, Eliza. The doctors say a week, maybe 2. If this meeting is real, if your mother is really there, I need to see her one more time." The raw emotion in his voice moved her. Whatever else had happened, whatever else she believed, Eliza could see that her father truly loved her mother, even after all this time, even after believing she had abandoned them. "I'm tired," Robert said suddenly, his eyes drooping. "The medication makes it hard to stay awake for long." "You should rest," Eliza agreed, standing. "We can talk more later." As she turned to leave, Robert's hand shot out with surprising strength, grasping her wrist. "Eliza," he said, his eyes suddenly clear and intense. "Be careful. If I'm right, if this is your mother reaching out, then the people who were after her might still be watching. They might know about the meeting. Trust no one." His words echoed Nathaniel's warning so precisely that Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. "I'll be careful," she promised, gently extracting her wrist from his grip. As she left the room, closing the door softly behind her, Eliza found Diane waiting in the hallway, her face a careful mask of concern. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. "Fine," Eliza replied, unwilling to share the details of their conversation. "He's resting now." Diane nodded. "He tires easily these days. The guest room is ready whenever you want to settle in, and I've prepared dinner if you're hungry." "Thank you," Eliza said, realizing she was indeed starving. She hadn't eaten since a hurried breakfast before her flight. "I think I'll just freshen up first, if that's all right." "Of course, take your time." Alone in the guest bathroom, Eliza splashed cold water on her face, trying to clear her head. The face that looked back at her from the mirror was pale and strained, dark circles under her eyes testifying to the emotional toll of the day. She reached into her blouse and pulled out the chain with her mother's ring, studying the simple gold band as it caught the light. For 15 years, she'd thought of it as evidence of her father's guilt. Now she had to consider that it might have been a message of love, a final connection to a mother who had sacrificed everything to keep her family safe. And in 2 days, she might finally learn the truth. If her mother really was alive, if she really was waiting at that address in Evanston, what would Eliza say to her? What could possibly explain or justify 15 years of absence, of allowing her daughter to believe she was dead? And if it was a trap, as both her father and Nathaniel had warned it might be, what then? One thing was certain: Eliza needed answers, and the only way to get them was to keep that appointment on Tuesday night. Whatever waited for her at that address in Evanston, reunion or deception, closure or more questions, she had to face it. But first, she had to figure out who Nathaniel was and how he fit into this increasingly complex puzzle. Dinner with Diane was a quiet affair. Eliza picked at her food, her appetite diminished by the weight of her father's revelations and the lingering mystery of Nathaniel. Diane made polite attempts at conversation, asking about Eliza's life in Boston, her job as a graphic designer, whether she was seeing anyone. Eliza provided brief, non-committal answers, her mind elsewhere. "You seem preoccupied," Diane observed finally, setting down her fork. "I understand it must be difficult seeing your father this way after so long." "It's not just that," Eliza admitted, deciding that a partial truth was better than none. "Dad told me some things about Mom's disappearance, things I never knew." Diane's expression remained carefully neutral. I see. Did you know? Eliza asked suddenly. About what he claims really happened that night? A flicker of something, discomfort perhaps or guilt, crossed Diane's face. Robert has shared certain theories with me over the years, she said carefully, about your mother's disappearance. Theories? Eliza leaned forward. So you don't believe him? Diane sighed, pushing her plate away. I believe that Robert believes what he told you, whether it's the truth or a story he's constructed to cope with something too painful to face. I can't say for certain. You think he's delusional? I think grief and guilt can do strange things to a person's mind, Diane replied diplomatically, especially over years, especially when compounded by the loss of his relationship with you. Eliza considered this. It was certainly possible that her father had created an elaborate fantasy to escape the reality of whatever had happened that night. The story about secret government agencies and mysterious agents did sound far-fetched, but it didn't explain Nathaniel or how he had known details that no one else could possibly know. What about the letter? Eliza asked. The one supposedly from my mother explaining why she had to leave? Diane's eyebrows rose slightly. He showed you that? He's never let me see it. Interesting, Eliza thought. If the letter was a fabrication, wouldn't her father have shown it to Diane at some point over their years together? And the recent note, Eliza continued, watching Diane's face carefully. The one with the address in Evanston for the meeting on Tuesday. This time, Diane's surprise seemed genuine. What meeting? What are you talking about? Either Diane was an excellent actress, or her father hadn't shared this development with his wife. Why would he keep it from her, unless he truly believed what he'd told Eliza about trusting no one? It's nothing, Eliza backtracked. Just something Dad mentioned. I think he might have been confused. Diane looked unconvinced but didn't press the issue. Well, if you have any questions about his care or the hospice arrangements, I'm happy to answer them. I know this is a difficult time for everyone. After dinner, Eliza helped clear the dishes, then excused herself, claiming fatigue from travel. In the guest room, she closed the door and took out her laptop, connecting to the house's Wi-Fi. Her first search was for Cassandra Government Program, which yielded nothing beyond academic papers about the mythological figure and a few conspiracy theory forums. Not surprising, she thought. If such a program existed, it would be classified, not something she could Google. Next, she searched for Nathaniel, along with various terms related to government agencies, intelligence work, and even disappeared from plane. Nothing relevant appeared. Without a last name or any other identifying details, it was like searching for a ghost. Which, she realized with a chill, he might literally be. Maybe she really had hallucinated him, conjured him from her subconscious as a way to process her anxiety about returning home. But the envelope with the address was real. She pulled it from her bag, comparing it to the one her father had received. The handwriting looked identical, the paper the same weight and color. 2 copies of the same invitation, sent to father and daughter separately. Eliza moved on to searching her mother's name. Margaret Morgan Disappearance, Chicago, 2010. This yielded several results. Local news articles about the case, a few mentions in broader pieces about unsolved disappearances in the Chicago area. Most portrayed her father as the primary suspect, though they noted that lack of evidence had prevented charges from being filed. One article from the Chicago Tribune, dated a year after her mother's disappearance, featured a quote from Detective Michael Brandt, the lead investigator. We remain convinced that Robert Morgan knows more than he's telling us about his wife's disappearance. The evidence points to foul play, and he was the last person to see her alive. Eliza remembered Detective Brandt well, a stocky man with perpetually suspicious eyes who had interviewed her multiple times, always with the air of someone who believed she was hiding something. At 15, traumatized and confused, she'd found him intimidating. Now she wondered if he might have answers. A quick search showed that Brandt had retired from the Chicago PD 5 years ago. His current contact information wasn't readily available online, but Eliza made a note to try to track him down tomorrow. If anyone might know more about the investigation into her mother's disappearance, it would be him. She turned off her laptop and prepared for bed, her mind still churning with questions. As she brushed her teeth in the guest bathroom, she studied her reflection again. People had always told her she looked like her mother. The same heart-shaped face, the same dark eyes and high cheekbones. Growing up, she'd loved the comparison. After her mother's disappearance, it had become painful, a constant reminder of what she'd lost. Now, staring at herself in the mirror, she wondered if her mother saw the resemblance too, wherever she was. If she missed her daughter as much as her daughter had missed her. Sleep proved elusive. Eliza tossed and turned, her dreams a confused jumble of images. Nathaniel's pale eyes, her father's skeletal hand reaching for hers, her mother's face as she remembered it, smiling and full of life. She woke several times, disoriented and sweating, before finally giving up on rest as dawn broke. She slipped out of the guest room quietly, not wanting to wake Diane or the night nurse who had arrived to sit with her father. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of medical equipment from upstairs. Eliza made her way to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee, finding comfort in the familiar ritual. As the coffee brewed, she found herself drawn to her father's study, a room she had once been forbidden to enter without permission. The door was unlocked. She stepped inside, half expecting to find it changed after 15 years, but it looked remarkably the same. The heavy oak desk, the walls lined with bookshelves, the leather armchair by the window where her father used to read in the evenings. This was where she had found her mother's ring the day after the disappearance. She had been looking for… what? Some clue? Some explanation? She'd pulled books from the shelves at random, hoping to find a note, a hidden message. And in a volume of Yeats's poetry, she had found the ring, tucked between the pages of When You Are Old. Eliza went to the poetry section now, her fingers trailing along the spines until she found the Yeats collection. It was still there, though more worn than she remembered. She pulled it out and opened it to When You Are Old, half expecting to find another message, another clue. The pages were empty. But as she was about to return the book to the shelf, she noticed something else, a small tear in the binding, as if something had been tucked into the spine itself. Carefully, she worked her finger into the tear and felt something thin and stiff. She pulled it out, a photograph, small enough to have been hidden in the book's binding for years without detection. The image showed her mother, looking younger than Eliza remembered her, standing next to a man Eliza didn't recognize. They were both dressed formally, her mother in an evening gown, the man in a tuxedo. They weren't looking at the camera, but at each other, caught in a moment of shared laughter. On the back, in her mother's handwriting, was a single word: Cassandra. Eliza's hands trembled as she stared at the photograph. Here was tangible evidence that at least part of her father's story might be true. Her mother had some connection to something called Cassandra. And who was this man? Not her father, certainly. A colleague? A friend? Something more? She slipped the photograph into her pocket as she heard movement upstairs. Diane or the nurse, starting the day. Eliza didn't want to be caught snooping in her father's study. She returned the book to its place and went back to the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of the now-ready coffee. Diane appeared a few minutes later, already dressed for the day in slacks and a simple blouse. "You're up early," she observed, helping herself to coffee. "Jet lag," Eliza lied. "How's Dad?" "About the same. The nurse says he had a restful night." Diane leaned against the counter, studying Eliza over the rim of her mug. "I was thinking I might go to the grocery store this morning, stock up on a few things. Would you like to come along, or would you prefer to stay here with your father?" Eliza recognized the question for what it was, an opportunity to spend time alone with her father without Diane's hovering presence. "I'll stay," she said. "If he wakes up, I'd like to talk with him more." Diane nodded, an unreadable expression crossing her face. Of course. I'll be about an hour. She hesitated, then added, Eliza, whatever your father told you yesterday, please remember that he's very ill. The medications, the pain, they can affect a person's thinking. I understand, Eliza said, though she wasn't sure she did. Was Diane trying to discredit Robert's story? And if so, why? Was she simply concerned that Eliza was being fed false hope? Or was there something more to her caution? After Diane left, Eliza went upstairs to her father's room. The night nurse, a kind-faced woman named Patrice, was gathering her things to leave. He's still sleeping, she told Eliza in a hushed voice. But he had a good night. The day nurse will be here at noon. Eliza thanked her and settled into the chair beside her father's bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Even in sleep, his face looked pained, the disease that was consuming him from the inside never truly allowing rest. She took out the photograph she'd found and studied it again. Her mother looked happy in the image, carefree in a way Eliza couldn't remember ever seeing her. The man beside her was handsome in a conventional way, strong jaw, confident smile, the kind of good looks that open doors in certain professions. Intelligence work, perhaps? His name was Adrian Cole. Eliza startled at her father's voice, raspy but clear. She hadn't noticed him wake up. You knew about this photo? She asked, showing it to him. Robert nodded weakly. Found it years ago hidden in that book of poetry, your mother's favorite hiding place. He attempted a smile, though it looked more like a grimace. Adrian was her handler at Cassandra. Her mentor, she called him. Handler? Like in a spy movie? Life isn't a movie, Eliza, Robert said softly. But yes, something like that. He recruited her from college, trained her. They worked together for years before she left that life behind. For you? Robert's gaze drifted to the window, where morning light was beginning to filter through the curtains. She said it was for me, for the life we could have together. But I've often wondered if there was more to it. If something happened that made her want to leave that world behind. Like what? I don't know. She never talked about her work, not specifically. Said it was safer that way. He focused on her again, his eyes suddenly sharp despite his weakened state. Did you decide? About Tuesday? Eliza hesitated. The photograph in her hand seemed to strengthen her father's story, but it was hardly definitive proof. Yet the alternative, that this was all an elaborate fantasy or a trap, seemed increasingly unlikely. I'll go, she said finally. We'll go together if you're strong enough. Relief washed over Robert's face. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you, Eliza. As he drifted back to sleep, Eliza found herself wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake. If the meeting was a trap, she was walking into it willingly, and she was bringing her dying father with her, a man too weak to defend himself, let alone her. But if there was even a chance that Margaret Morgan was alive, that she would be waiting for them in Evanston on Tuesday night, Eliza had to take it. For her father's sake, for her own peace of mind, and for the possibility of answers to questions that had haunted her for 15 years. First, though, she needed to find Detective Brandt. If anyone could shed light on the official investigation into her mother's disappearance, it would be him. And she needed to learn more about this Adrian Cole, the man in the photograph. If he had been her mother's handler, he might know where she was now, or at least what had really happened 15 years ago. Time was running out. Tuesday was just a day away, and her father's condition could worsen at any moment. Whatever answers were waiting for her, Eliza needed to find them quickly. Tracking down retired Detective Michael Brandt proved easier than Eliza had expected. A few calls to the Chicago Police Department, a convincing story about wanting to thank him for his work on her mother's case, and by mid-morning, she had an address in Rogers Park and a warning that Brandt wasn't particularly fond of visitors. He's become a bit of a recluse since retirement, the helpful desk sergeant told her, Lost his wife a couple years back, doesn't socialize much, but if anyone would remember your mother's case, it'd be him. That one got under his skin." Eliza waited until Diane returned from the grocery store before leaving, making an excuse about needing to pick up some personal items. Her stepmother seemed relieved that Eliza was getting out of the house, perhaps hoping that some distance from Robert and his story would bring Eliza back to what Diane clearly considered reality. Rogers Park was about a 20-minute drive from Oak Park, a diverse neighborhood on Chicago's far north side, bordered by Lake Michigan to the east. Brant's address led her to a modest bungalow on a quiet residential street, its small front yard neatly maintained despite the early spring chill that had most gardens still looking barren. Eliza sat in her rental car for several minutes, gathering her courage. What would she say to Brant? How much should she reveal about what her father had told her, about Nathaniel, about the upcoming meeting? She decided that less was more, at least initially. First, she needed to gauge whether Brant was a potential ally or another reason to be cautious. The man who answered her knock was shorter than she remembered, though still solidly built, with the compact musculature of someone who had once been very physically active, but was now softening with age and inactivity. His hair, once dark and thick, was now gray and sparse, but his eyes were the same, watchful, assessing, suspicious. "Detective Brant?" Eliza said, though she recognized him immediately. "Just Brant these days," he replied, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Haven't been a detective in 5 years. And you are?" "Eliza Morgan," she said, watching recognition dawn on his face. "Margaret Morgan's daughter." Brant's expression shifted, surprise giving way to a complex mixture of emotions. Interest, certainly, but also what looked like concern, maybe even alarm. "Eliza," he said finally, "you've grown up." "It's been 15 years, she pointed out. He nodded, then glanced past her at the quiet street, as if checking to see if she'd been followed. "You'd better come in," he said, stepping back from the doorway. The interior of Brant's home was Spartan but not unlived in. The living room contained a well-worn leather sofa, a recliner positioned in front of a modest television, and bookshelves filled with what looked like crime novels and police procedurals. The walls were decorated with photographs, Brant in uniform, Brant receiving commendations, Brant with a smiling woman who must have been his late wife. "Coffee?" he offered, leading her toward the kitchen. "No, thank you," Eliza replied, taking a seat at the small kitchen table. "I won't take much of your time." Brant poured himself a cup from a pot that looked like it had been sitting on the warmer for hours, then sat across from her. "So," he said, studying her over the rim of his mug, "what brings you to my door after all these years?" "My father is dying," Eliza said, deciding that directness was the best approach. "I've come back to Chicago to see him before the end." "I'm sorry to hear that," Brant said, though his tone suggested limited sympathy. "Cancer, I heard." Of course he would have kept tabs on the man he believed had gotten away with murder. "Yes," Eliza confirmed. "Pancreatic. The doctors say weeks at most." Brant grunted, taking a sip of his coffee. "And how is that bringing you to me?" "He's told me things about my mother's disappearance, things that contradict the official investigation." Brant set down his mug, his expression hardening. "Let me guess, he's finally found the courage to confess, now that he's staring death in the face." "No," Eliza said firmly, "just the opposite. He's maintained his innocence, but he's given me details that he claims he kept from the police, from everyone, including me." "What kind of details?" Eliza hesitated, then decided to take the plunge. "He says my mother was involved with a government agency called Cassandra, that the men who came for her that night were her former colleagues, that she escaped them, and that she's been in hiding ever since." She expected disbelief, perhaps even laughter. Instead, Brant's face drained of color. He stood abruptly, moving to the window and checking the street again before pulling the blinds closed. "Who have you told about this?" he demanded, his voice low and urgent. Eliza blinked, taken aback by his reaction. "No one. Just you." "Keep it that way." Brant ran a hand over his thinning hair, his earlier composure gone. "Jesus Christ. After all these years, he finally told you." You believe him?" Eliza couldn't hide her shock. Brant sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his years. "I didn't. Not at first. It sounded like the desperate lie of a guilty man. But there were inconsistencies in the case. Things that didn't add up." "Like what?" "Like the fact that the blood found in your parents' bedroom was indeed your mother's, but the amount was minimal, consistent with a nosebleed or a small cut, not with violence sufficient to cause death. Like the fact that none of the neighbors reported hearing anything unusual that night, despite your father's claim of a physical altercation with multiple intruders." Brant paused, taking another sip of coffee. "And most telling, the fact that 2 weeks after your mother's disappearance, I was visited by men claiming to be FBI agents who insisted on taking over aspects of the investigation." "But you didn't believe they were really FBI," Eliza guessed. Brant shook his head. "Their credentials looked legitimate enough, but I've worked with the Bureau before. These guys were different. The way they carried themselves, the questions they asked, or didn't ask. And the fact that they took files from our evidence room but never filed any official reports, never followed up with me or anyone else on the force. So you started to think my father might be telling the truth." "I started to consider the possibility," Brant corrected. "I kept digging, quietly, looking into your mother's background, trying to find any connection to government work. There was nothing, of course. If this Cassandra program exists, it's buried deep." "Did you find anything about a man named Adrian Cole?" Eliza asked, thinking of the photograph. Brant's eyebrows shot up. "Where did you hear that name?" "I found a photograph of him with my mother. Dad said he was her handler at Cassandra." Brant stood again, moving to a small desk in the corner of the kitchen. He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a file folder, bringing it back to the table. "Adrian Cole," he said, opening the folder to reveal a grainy photograph that matched the man in the image Eliza had found. "Officially, a State Department employee who died in a car accident in 2005, 5 years before your mother disappeared. And unofficially? Unofficially, a ghost. After I got suspicious about the FBI agents who inserted themselves into your mother's case, I started looking into similar situations, missing persons investigations that were mysteriously taken over by federal agencies, cases that went cold with no explanation. Cole's name came up in connection with 3 such cases, always peripherally, never as a central figure. Just there, in the background." Eliza tried to process this information. If Brant, a skeptical detective with decades of experience, had come to believe there might be truth to her father's story, then perhaps it wasn't as far-fetched as she'd initially thought. "There's more," she said, deciding to trust him further. "I've received an invitation to meet someone in Evanston tomorrow night. The note implies it's my mother. Dad received the same invitation." Brant's face darkened. "That's not good, Eliza. If your mother has indeed been in hiding all these years, if these people have been looking for her, then this meeting could be a trap. They might be using you and your father to draw her out. Or it could really be her," Eliza countered. "My father is dying. Maybe she's decided the risk is worth it to see him one last time." "Maybe," Brant allowed, though he looked unconvinced. "But if your father's story is true, if these people are as dangerous as he claims, then you're putting yourself in their crosshairs by attending this meeting." "I don't have a choice," Eliza said simply. "I need to know the truth. I've lived with questions for 15 years. I can't walk away now, not when I'm this close to answers." Brant studied her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "I understand, but at least let me help you prepare. If you're determined to walk into what might be a trap, you should do it with your eyes open." For the next hour, Brant shared everything he'd learned over the years about the mysterious circumstances surrounding Margaret Morgan's disappearance. He showed Eliza police reports, witness statements, photographs from the scene. all copies he'd made for his personal files before retiring, suspecting that the originals might someday disappear from official records. "There's one more thing," he said finally, reaching into the file for a small, sealed envelope. "This came for me about a year after I retired. No return address, no note. Just this." He handed her the envelope. Inside was a small flash drive. "What's on it?" Eliza asked. "A video file, dated 6 months after your mother disappeared." Brant's expression was grim. "It shows a woman who looks very much like Margaret Morgan entering a building in Geneva, Switzerland. The video quality isn't great, and it's brief, just a few seconds, but I'd stake my reputation on it being her." "Who sent it to you?" "I don't know. At first I thought it might be from someone trying to discredit my investigation, to suggest that your mother had simply run off to Europe. But given everything else?" He shrugged. "Keep it. Watch it yourself. Maybe you'll see something I missed." Eliza pocketed the flash drive, her mind racing with implications. If the woman in the video was indeed her mother, then at least part of what her father had told her was true. Margaret Morgan hadn't died that night 15 years ago. "One last question," she said as Brant walked her to the door. "Have you ever heard of a man named Nathaniel? Silver hair, pale blue eyes, speaks very formally?" Brant frowned, considering. "No, doesn't ring a bell. Is he connected to all this?" "I'm not sure," Eliza admitted, "but he seemed to know an awful lot about my mother's disappearance. Things no one else could know." "Be careful, Eliza," Brant said, his hand on the doorknob. "Whatever's going on here, it's bigger than a missing woman. If your father is right about Cassandra, if your mother really was involved in some kind of classified program, then you're dealing with people who operate outside normal constraints. People who don't leave witnesses." "I'll be careful," she promised. "And thank you for believing me, for believing my father." Brant's expression softened slightly. "I was wrong about him. I was so sure he'd killed her, disposed of the body somewhere we'd never find it. It happens, you know, more often than anyone wants to admit. But over time, I came to believe he was telling the truth, at least as he understood it." He paused, then added, "If you do find your mother tomorrow night, tell her Michael Brant would like to close this case properly, once and for all." Eliza nodded and stepped out onto the porch. As she walked back to her car, she could feel Brant watching her, his concerned gaze following her until she was safely inside with the doors locked. The drive back to Oak Park gave her time to think. Between her father's revelations, the photograph of Adrian Cole, and now Brant's confirmation that something unusual had indeed surrounded her mother's disappearance, the pieces were starting to come together. But the central question remained. Would Margaret Morgan be waiting for them in Evanston tomorrow night? Or was something more sinister awaiting them? And where did Nathaniel fit into all of this? How had he known about the meeting, about the ring, about everything? The flash drive in her pocket felt like it was burning a hole through her jacket. She was eager to view its contents, to see for herself if the woman captured on video was truly her mother. But first, she needed to check on her father, to see if his condition had changed, if he was still determined to attend the meeting despite his rapidly failing health. As she turned onto Forest Avenue, Eliza was so lost in thought that she almost missed it. A black sedan parked across the street from her father's house, 2 men sitting inside watching the property with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. She drove past without slowing, turning at the next corner and parking out of sight. Her heart pounding, she took out her phone and called the house. Diane answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello? It's Eliza," she said, keeping her voice low as if the men might somehow hear her. "Don't react to what I'm about to tell you. There are men watching the house. I think my father might have been telling the truth all along." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Diane responded, her voice carefully controlled. "I see. Why don't you come inside and we can discuss your shopping trip?" Eliza understood the message. Diane was adapting to the possibility that someone might be listening. "I'll be right there," she said, ending the call. She drove around the block, watching for any sign that the black sedan was moving, but it remained stationary. As she pulled into her father's driveway, she kept her face neutral, giving no indication that she had noticed anything unusual. Inside her pocket, her hand closed around the flash drive Brandt had given her, making sure it was secure. Diane was waiting at the door, her expression a perfect mask of everyday normalcy. "Did you find everything you needed?" she asked as Eliza stepped inside. "Most of it," Eliza replied, playing along. "How's Dad?" "Resting. The day nurse is with him." Diane locked the door behind Eliza, then led her into the kitchen, away from the windows facing the street. Once there, her calm facade cracked slightly. "What men? What did you see?" "A black sedan across the street. 2 men inside watching the house. They don't look like reporters or police." Eliza hesitated, then decided to be direct. "Diane, I need to know what you believe about my mother's disappearance. The truth." Diane sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking much older than her 58 years. "I believe your father," she said quietly. "I always have, though I've sometimes suggested otherwise to protect him, to protect both of us." "You knew? All this time?" "Not at first," Diane admitted. "When I met Robert, he was just the sad widower everyone suspected of killing his wife. I never believed he was capable of that, but I accepted the official story, that Margaret had most likely been the victim of foul play, even if Robert wasn't responsible." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "It wasn't until after we were married that he told me the truth. Or at least, what he believed was the truth." "About Cassandra? About my mother being some kind of government agent?" Diane nodded. It sounded insane. I thought grief had affected his mind, that he'd constructed this elaborate fantasy to cope with whatever had really happened that night. But then... She trailed off, looking toward the window reflexively, though the blinds were drawn. "Then what?" Eliza prompted. "Then strange things started happening. Hang-up calls in the middle of the night, cars parked on the street that would be gone if I tried to approach them. Once I found evidence that someone had been in the house while we were out. Nothing taken, nothing obviously disturbed, but small things out of place." Diane's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "And about 5 years ago, I was approached by a man who claimed to be with the FBI. He asked a lot of questions about Robert, about you, about whether Robert ever talked about Margaret." "What did you tell him?" "That Robert had accepted his wife's death, that he never spoke of her. It was what Robert and I had agreed I should say if anyone ever questioned me." Diane met Eliza's gaze directly. "I've played the part of the skeptical wife for years, Eliza. Even with you, especially with you, because Robert insisted it was safer that way." Eliza absorbed this, feeling a complex mixture of emotions, relief that Diane was an ally, not an obstacle, but also a growing sense of unease. If both her father and stepmother had been living under this cloud of surveillance and suspicion for years, it lent credibility to the idea that powerful forces were still interested in Margaret Morgan and her family. "I met with retired Detective Brandt today," Eliza said, deciding to reciprocate Diane's honesty. "He confirmed that there were unusual circumstances around Mom's disappearance. He showed me police files, evidence that was never made public." She pulled out the flash drive, including this video footage that might show my mother in Switzerland, 6 months after she supposedly died. Diane's eyes widened. "You think she's really alive?" "I don't know," Eliza admitted. "But Dad received a note with an address in Evanston, inviting him to a meeting tomorrow night. A meeting he believes is with Mom." "He told me about the note," Diane said, surprising Eliza. "But he didn't say he thought it was from Margaret. He just said he needed to go to this address, that it was important." "He didn't want to get your hopes up," Eliza guessed. "Or maybe he was still protecting you, in case—" She didn't finish the thought, but Diane nodded in understanding. "In case whoever is watching is still listening," she completed. "This house may be bugged, We've swept it periodically over the years, but technology advances. We can't be certain. The idea that their conversation might be monitored sent a chill through Eliza. She glanced around the kitchen, wondering if hidden microphones were capturing every word. "I need to see what's on this drive," she said, tapping the small device. "Is there a computer I can use?" "Use the one in Robert's study," Diane suggested. "It's not connected to the internet. He disconnected it years ago, worried about remote access. If there's anything on that drive that certain parties wouldn't want seen, it's safer to view it on an isolated machine." Eliza nodded and headed for her father's study, Diane following close behind. The older woman closed the door after them, then went to the window and carefully peered around the edge of the curtain. "They're still there," she confirmed. "They must know you've returned to Chicago. Perhaps they expected you would visit your father before his death, and they've been watching for you." "Or they know about the meeting tomorrow night," Eliza suggested grimly, booting up the old desktop computer on her father's desk. "Maybe they sent the invitations hoping to draw Mom out if she's alive, or to see who shows up if she's not." The computer came to life slowly, its operating system several versions out of date. Eliza plugged in the flash drive and navigated to its contents, a single video file as Brandt had said. She double-clicked it, and the video player opened. The footage was grainy and appeared to be from a security camera positioned across from the entrance of an elegant building. The timestamp in the corner showed a date 6 months after her mother's disappearance. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a taxi pulled up, and a woman emerged. Eliza leaned closer to the screen, her heart pounding. The woman was wearing a trench coat and a scarf that partially obscured her face, but there was something in her posture, in the way she moved, that was achingly familiar. She turned briefly toward the camera as she paid the driver, and Eliza gasped. It was her mother, older than in Eliza's memories, her hair styled differently, but unmistakably Margaret Morgan. "That's her," Diane whispered, also leaning in. "That's Margaret." The video showed Margaret entering the building, then ended abruptly. The entire clip had lasted less than 15 seconds, but it was enough. Her mother had been alive, at least 6 months after her supposed death. "Where is this?" Eliza asked, rewinding to study the building. It was an elegant structure, European in architecture, with a discreet sign by the entrance that was too small to read in the grainy footage. "I don't know Geneva well," Diane admitted, "but it looks like one of the private banks they have there, the kind that cater to very wealthy clients who value discretion." Eliza stared at the frozen image of her mother about to enter the building, trying to reconcile this evidence with everything she'd believed for 15 years. Margaret Morgan hadn't been murdered. She had fled, had established a new life somewhere far from Chicago, far from her husband and daughter. "Why?" Eliza whispered, the question directed more at the image on the screen than at Diane. "Why would she leave us like that? Why not take me with her if she was in danger?" Diane placed a gentle hand on Eliza's shoulder. "I don't know, but I'm sure she had her reasons. If Robert is right, if she was being pursued by people from this Cassandra program, perhaps she felt you would be safer with your father. But she let me believe she was dead. Let me believe Dad might have killed her." Eliza couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "For 15 years I've lived with that. How could she do that to me?" Before Diane could respond, there was a soft knock at the study door. The day nurse, Lydia, poked her head in. "Mrs. Morgan, your husband is awake and asking for Eliza." Diane nodded. "We'll be right there." Eliza removed the flash drive and powered down the computer, her mind still reeling from what she'd seen. She needed to talk to her father, to tell him about the video, about the men watching the house. Tomorrow night suddenly seemed very far away, and yet also rushing toward them with alarming speed. Upstairs, Robert looked even worse than he had that morning, his skin now taking on a yellowish tinge that Eliza knew was a sign of advancing liver failure. Yet his eyes were alert, bright with what looked like a mixture of pain and determination. "You went to see Brant," he said as soon as she entered the room, surprising her. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Because it's what I would have done. What your mother would have done. You need answers, and Brant had some of them." Eliza sat beside the bed, taking her father's frail hand. "He believes you," she said simply. "About Mom, about Cassandra, all of it. And he gave me this." She showed him the flash drive. "It has video of Mom in Geneva 6 months after she disappeared. She's alive, or at least she was then." Robert closed his eyes briefly, a mixture of relief and pain crossing his face. "I knew it," he whispered. "All these years I knew she must have gotten away from them. That's why they've never stopped watching, never stopped listening." "There are men outside now," Eliza confirmed, "in a black sedan." "They've been there for 3 days," Robert said, opening his eyes again. "Ever since I received the note about the meeting. They know something is happening." "Should we call the police?" Robert shook his head weakly. "The police can't help us. These men won't do anything illegal, won't give the authorities any reason to question them. They'll just watch and wait." He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. "But we will go to that meeting, Eliza. Tomorrow night. I need to see your mother one more time before I die." "Do you think it's really her? That she sent the invitations?" "I don't know," Robert admitted. "But either way, we'll get answers. If it's Margaret, we'll learn why she's reaching out now after all these years. And if it's a trap—" He trailed off, his breath coming shorter. "If it's a trap, we're walking right into it," Eliza finished for him. "Is that wise?" "Wise? No." Robert's gaze was steady despite his failing body. "But necessary. This has gone on long enough. The secrets, the hiding, the not knowing. It ends tomorrow night, one way or another." Eliza knew he was right. Whatever awaited them in Evanston, reunion or danger, it was time to face it. 15 years of questions deserved answers, even if those answers came with risks. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said, deciding that full disclosure was the only path forward now. "On the plane to Chicago, I met a man named Nathaniel. He knew things, Dad. Things about Mom's disappearance, about the ring I found in your study. He gave me the same invitation you received, the address in Evanston, the time, and then he vanished. Literally disappeared from the middle seat of a moving plane." Robert's expression remained remarkably calm, as if this revelation was less surprising to him than it should have been. "Describe him," he requested. "Mid-50s, silver hair, very pale blue eyes. Spoke formally, moved strangely, like every gesture was calculated." Eliza frowned. "You don't seem shocked." "Because I've met him too," Robert said quietly. "Not on a plane, but here, in this room, 3 nights ago." "What? How is that possible? Who is he?" "I don't know," Robert admitted. "He appeared by my bedside in the middle of the night. The night nurse had stepped out and suddenly he was just there. He told me that Margaret was reaching out, that I needed to be at that address in Evanston. He said—" Robert hesitated, as if weighing whether to continue. "What, Dad? What did he say?" "He said that there are spaces between worlds, places where rules we think are fixed become flexible. He said your mother found one of those spaces 15 years ago and that she's been living on the other side ever since." Eliza stared at her father, wondering if the pain medication was affecting his mind. "What does that even mean?" "I don't know," Robert repeated. "But he seemed to think I would understand when I saw her. When we both saw her." He closed his eyes again, clearly exhausted by the conversation. "Whatever the truth is, Eliza, we'll face it together tomorrow night." As if on cue, the day nurse appeared in the doorway. "I need to administer his medication now," she said apologetically. "He should rest." Eliza nodded and stood, still holding her father's hand. "I'll be here," she promised him. "Tomorrow, we'll go together." Robert's lips curved in a faint smile as he drifted towards sleep, the medication already taking effect. "Together," he murmured, "like it should have been all these years." Outside her father's room, Eliza leaned against the wall, trying to process everything she'd learned. The evidence that her mother was alive. The watchers outside, monitoring their every move. Nathaniel's impossible appearances and cryptic messages about spaces between worlds. None of it made sense, and yet all of it was connected. Tomorrow night, at that address in Evanston, she would finally get the answers she'd been seeking for 15 years. Answers about her mother, about Cassandra, about Nathaniel, about everything. But first, they had to make it to tomorrow night. With her father's rapidly declining health and mysterious men watching the house, even that wasn't guaranteed. They needed a plan. Eliza spent the rest of the day alternating between sitting with her father and conferring with Diane in hushed tones about their options for the following night. The black sedan remained parked across the street, its occupants occasionally changing shifts, but the surveillance never ceasing. "We need to find a way to get to Evanston without being followed," Eliza said as she and Diane sat in the kitchen, voices low despite being on the opposite side of the house from the watchers. "And we need to figure out how to transport Dad safely. He's too weak to sit in a car for long." "I've been thinking about that," Diane replied, pushing a cup of tea toward Eliza. "I have a friend who's a paramedic. He might be able to help us with a private ambulance, make it look like we're transferring Robert to a hospice facility. Would that work? They must know about Dad's condition." "They might expect such a move," Diane acknowledged, "but the timing would seem coincidental, not connected to the meeting, and an ambulance would give Robert the medical support he needs for the journey." Eliza considered this. But they'd still follow the ambulance, wouldn't they? Probably. But an ambulance has certain advantages. It can take routes other vehicles can't, can demand right-of-way. And my friend, he knows how to be discreet. Diane hesitated, then added, "He's helped us before, when we needed to move Robert for medical tests without being observed." "This has been your life for 15 years, Eliza realized, studying her stepmother with new appreciation. "Living under surveillance, always looking over your shoulder." Diane's smile was tinged with sadness. "It became normal after a while. You adjust to almost anything, given time." She reached across the table and squeezed Eliza's hand. "I'm sorry we kept you in the dark. Robert wanted to protect you. We both did." "I understand that now," Eliza said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The anger she'd carried for so long, at her father for what she'd believed he'd done, at Diane for replacing her mother so quickly, was beginning to dissolve in the face of what she now knew. They had been protecting her, in their way. They had been victims in this strange scenario, too. "So we use an ambulance," she continued, refocusing on the problem at hand. "But we'll still need to lose our tail before we reach the actual meeting place. Leave that part to Carl, my paramedic friend. He's resourceful." Diane stood and moved to the window, carefully peering around the edge of the curtain. "They're still there. I should call Carl now, see if he can help us tomorrow night." While Diane made her call from the landline in her bedroom, a precaution in case Eliza's cell phone was being monitored, Eliza went to check on her father again. The day nurse had left, with the night nurse scheduled to arrive in an hour. Robert was awake but groggy, the pain medication making his speech slightly slurred. "How are you feeling?" Eliza asked, knowing it was a foolish question even as she said it. "Like I'm dying," Robert replied with unexpected bluntness, though his lips curved in a faint smile, "but determined to last until tomorrow night." "We're working on a plan to get you there safely," Eliza told him, explaining Diane's idea about the ambulance. Robert nodded weakly. "Good. That might work." He gestured for her to come closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's something else you should know, Eliza. Something I didn't tell you before, about your mother." Eliza leaned in, her heart rate accelerating. "What is it?" "The work she did for Cassandra. It wasn't typical intelligence work, not espionage or analysis or anything like that. Robert's eyes, though clouded with medication, held hers intently. She once told me, in a rare moment when she spoke of her past, that Cassandra was named after the Greek prophetess for a reason. They were studying abilities, people who could see things others couldn't. "What kind of abilities?" Eliza asked, a chill running down her spine. "Precognition, remote viewing, things science can't explain." Robert's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Your mother had a gift, Eliza. She could sometimes sense things before they happened. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make headlines. But she would know when the phone was about to ring, or who was at the door before they knocked. Little things that added up." "You're saying she was psychic?" Eliza couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "I'm saying Cassandra thought she was," Robert clarified. "They recruited her from college after a series of tests identified her as having potential. They trained her, pushed her abilities, used her for I don't know what. She never said, and I never pressed. But I saw it myself sometimes. Her knowing things she couldn't possibly know." Eliza thought of the many small moments from her childhood when her mother had seemed to anticipate needs before they were expressed, had known when Eliza was upset without being told, had found lost objects with uncanny accuracy. She'd always attributed it to normal maternal intuition, but was it something more? Is that why they came for her? Because of this ability? "I think so," Robert said. "She said she'd accessed files she shouldn't have, but I believe it was more than that. I think she learned something using her gift, something they didn't want known, something dangerous enough that they were willing to kill to keep it secret." The idea was so fantastic that Eliza struggled to take it seriously. And yet, hadn't she already encountered the impossible in the form of Nathaniel, a man who could appear and disappear at will? Hadn't her father mentioned spaces between worlds where normal rules didn't apply? "Do you think that's what Nathaniel meant?" she asked. "About spaces between worlds? That Mom found some way to, what, move between dimensions?" "I don't know," Robert admitted. "But I think whatever she discovered, whatever she was running from, it goes beyond normal government secrets, beyond anything we can easily understand." His eyes drifted closed, exhaustion claiming him again. "Tomorrow night," he murmured. "Tomorrow night we'll know." Eliza sat with him until he fell asleep, her mind churning with this new information. When she returned downstairs, she found Diane in the kitchen, looking relieved. "Carl can help us," she reported. "He's on shift tomorrow evening, but he can arrange to be the one dispatched if we call for a transfer to hospice care. He says he has some ideas about how to lose anyone following the ambulance." "That's good," Eliza said, distracted by her conversation with her father. "Diane, did you ever notice anything unusual about my mother? Any strange abilities or talents?" Diane looked surprised by the question. "I never met your mother, Eliza. She was gone before Robert and I connected." "Right, of course." Eliza shook her head, trying to clear it. "Dad just told me something strange. He said Mom had some kind of psychic ability, that this Cassandra program was studying people like her." To Eliza's surprise, Diane didn't look shocked or dismissive. "That would explain some things," she said slowly. "Things Robert has said over the years, usually when he's very tired or when the pain medication makes him less guarded. Comments about your mother knowing things, sensing things. You believe it's possible?" Diane considered the question carefully. "I believe there are many things in this world we don't understand," she said finally. "And I believe the government would absolutely study such phenomena if they thought there was any military or intelligence application. Is your mother genuinely psychic? I have no idea. But could an organization like Cassandra exist to investigate such possibilities?" "Absolutely." Eliza nodded, accepting this measured response. "We should get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow is going to be complicated." That night, Eliza's dreams were vivid and disturbing. She saw her mother standing on the far side of what looked like a shimmering veil, trying to speak to her, but no sound came through. She saw Nathaniel moving through solid walls as if they were mist, and she saw her father, not as the dying man in the hospital bed upstairs, but as his younger self, strong and vital, fighting desperately against shadowy figures who were trying to take her mother away. She woke just after dawn, disoriented and unrested. For a moment, she wasn't sure where she was. The guest room in her father's house felt both familiar and strange, a place she had known intimately once but had been absent from for so long that it now seemed like a setting from someone else's life. A soft knock at the door roused her fully. "Eliza?" Diane called softly. "Are you awake?" "Yes, come in." Diane entered, already dressed for the day but looking as tired as Eliza felt. "I've just been with Robert. He's not doing well this morning. The nurse says his vital signs are weaker. His body is starting to shut down." Eliza sat up, alarm coursing through her. "Will he make it until tonight?" "The nurse thinks so, but she's recommending we move him to hospice care sooner rather than later." Diane's expression was grim. "Which actually works for our plan, but I wanted you to be prepared. He's fading quickly." Eliza dressed hurriedly and went to her father's room. The change from yesterday was shocking. Robert's skin now had a gray undertone. His breathing was shallow and labored, and his eyes, when they fluttered open at her approach, were unfocused. "Dad?" she said, taking his hand. "It's Eliza." He seemed to struggle to focus on her, recognition dawning slowly. "Eliza," he whispered. "What time is it?" "Just after 7 in the morning, Tuesday morning." "Today," he said, squeezing her hand with what little strength he had left. "Tonight we see her." "Yes," Eliza confirmed, forcing confidence into her voice though her heart was sinking. She wasn't sure he would live that long, let alone be conscious enough to recognize her mother if she really did appear. "Diane's arranging the ambulance. We'll get you there." "Good." His eyes drifted closed again. So tired. The morning passed in a blur of medical consultations and preparations. The hospice doctor came to evaluate Robert and agreed that a transfer to inpatient hospice care was appropriate. Diane, playing her part to perfection, insisted on a specific facility in Evanston, citing its excellent reputation and proximity to a friend who could help her through this difficult time. The doctor made the arrangements, scheduling the transfer for 6 p.m., giving them just enough time to reach the meeting place by 8. Throughout these conversations, Eliza marveled at Diane's composure, her ability to navigate this complex situation while appearing to be simply a concerned wife making end-of-life arrangements for her husband. "You're remarkable," Eliza told her when they were alone again. "I don't think I could be this calm." "Years of practice," Diane replied with a sad smile. "And I've had time to prepare for losing him. I've known this was coming for months." She glanced toward the window. "They're still out there. 2 men in the sedan, and I spotted another one at the coffee shop across the street this morning. They're increasing their surveillance." "They must know something's happening today." "Probably." Diane looked at her watch. "Carl will be here with the ambulance at 6. He'll have a second paramedic with him, someone he trusts. They'll get Robert safely into the vehicle with all the medical equipment he needs. After that, we follow Carl's lead." "And then?" Eliza asked. "When we reach this address, what do we do? Just wait and see who shows up?" "That's all we can do," Diane said simply. "Be prepared for anything but hope for the best." The rest of the day passed with excruciating slowness. Eliza sat with her father, who drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally squeezing her hand or murmuring something indistinct. The nurse monitored his vital signs, adjusting his medication to keep him comfortable. Diane made calls, finalizing the hospice arrangements, her voice steady and businesslike though her eyes betrayed her concern. Outside, the watchers remained, the black sedan a constant presence across the street. Eliza found herself checking the time obsessively, counting down the hours, then the minutes, until 6 o'clock. At 5:30, while Diane was upstairs helping the nurse prepare Robert for transport, Eliza's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Be careful tonight. Trust nothing you see. N. Nathaniel." It had to be. But what did he mean? Trust nothing you see? Was he warning her that the meeting was a trap after all? Before she could contemplate the message further, there was a knock at the front door. She checked her watch, still 20 minutes before the ambulance was scheduled to arrive. Cautiously, she approached the door and looked through the peephole. Detective Brandt stood on the porch, looking anxious. Eliza opened the door, surprised. "Detective? What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Brandt said urgently, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I've found something about Adrian Cole, something you need to know before tonight." Eliza led Brandt into the kitchen, away from the windows. "What about Adrian Cole?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Brandt looked tense, his normally composed demeanor betraying genuine concern. "I did some more digging after you left yesterday, called in some favors, reached out to old contacts. I found out that Adrian Cole didn't die in that car accident in 2005. "What?" "The accident was staged. Cole went deep undercover after that, working on something classified. And here's the kicker. He resurfaced briefly in 2010, right around the time your mother disappeared." Eliza felt a chill run through her. "You think he was involved? That he was one of the men who came for her that night?" "It's possible," Brandt admitted. "But there's more. I found a connection between Cole and a research facility in Evanston, the same address you're supposed to go to tonight." Eliza sank into a chair trying to process this new information. "What kind of research facility?" "On paper, it's a private think tank called the Thorne Institute, specializing in advanced cognitive studies. But it's received substantial funding from DARPA and other government agencies associated with experimental programs." Brandt leaned closer. "And get this, the property is owned by a shell company that traces back to a holding group with ties to several other locations linked to classified research, including one in Geneva, Switzerland." "Where my mother was seen on that video," Eliza murmured. "Exactly." Brandt placed a small folder on the table. "There's something else you should see." Inside the folder was a photograph, recent by the look of it, of a man entering the Thorne Institute. Though older than in the photograph Eliza had found in her father's study, she recognized him immediately. Adrian Cole. "This was taken yesterday," Brandt said. "He's there, Eliza, at the place you're supposed to go tonight." "So it is a trap," Eliza said, her heart sinking. "They're using us to—" "What? Confirm Mom is still alive? Draw her out?" "Maybe," Brandt acknowledged. "Or maybe your mother really is there working with Cole now. We don't know enough about what happened 15 years ago, about her relationship with Cole or with Cassandra." Diane appeared in the doorway, surprise registering on her face at the sight of Brandt. "Detective, what's going on?" Quickly, Eliza introduced them and summarized what Brandt had discovered. Diane's expression grew increasingly concerned as she absorbed the information. "So this Thorne Institute is connected to Cassandra?" she asked. "I can't confirm that," Brandt said. "Cassandra doesn't officially exist in any records I can access. But the pattern fits. Secretive research, government funding through obscured channels, facilities in multiple countries." "We need to tell Dad," Eliza said, standing. "Wait," Diane cautioned. "Robert is very weak. If we tell him this place might be a trap, he might insist on going anyway. And the stress could—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. They all knew what she meant. In his condition, any additional stress could be fatal. "So what do we do?" Eliza asked, looking between Brandt and Diane. "Cancel the meeting? But if Mom is really there, if this is our only chance to see her—" "I'm not saying don't go," Brandt clarified. "I'm saying go in with your eyes open. Be prepared for anything." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small object, placing it on the table beside the folder. A gun. "I can't give you this officially," he said, "but unofficially, I think you should have protection." Eliza stared at the weapon. She'd never held a gun before, let alone fired one. "I don't know how to use that." "Safety's here," Brandt demonstrated without touching the gun. "Point and pull the trigger. It's loaded with 6 rounds. Hopefully you won't need it, but if you do—" Diane reached out and took the gun before Eliza could, checking it with surprising competence. "I know how to use it," she said, catching Eliza's startled look. "Robert insisted I learn years ago." She tucked the weapon into her purse. "Thank you, Detective." A vehicle pulled up outside. The ambulance, right on schedule. Through the kitchen window, Eliza could see the black sedan across the street, its occupants suddenly alert, one speaking into what looked like a radio or phone. "They're watching the ambulance," she reported. "As we expected," Diane said, her composure returning. "Detective, thank you for the warning, but we need to proceed with our plan. Would you like to come with us?" Brandt shook his head. "I'd only complicate things. But I'll be nearby, keeping an eye on that place from a distance. If you need help, call me." He handed Eliza a card with his cell number. Carl, Diane's paramedic friend, turned out to be a burly man in his 40s with a no-nonsense attitude and kind eyes. He and his partner efficiently transferred Robert from his bed to a gurney, hooking him up to portable monitoring equipment and oxygen. Robert was awake but groggy, his eyes finding Eliza's as they wheeled him toward the stairs. "Tonight," he whispered, reaching for her hand. "We'll see her tonight." "Yes, Dad," Eliza assured him, squeezing his hand gently. "Just rest now. Save your strength." The transfer to the ambulance went smoothly, with Carl and his partner handling Robert with practiced care. Diane insisted on riding in the back with her husband, playing the part of the devoted wife to perfection. Eliza would follow in her rental car, maintaining the illusion that this was simply a hospice transfer. As the ambulance pulled away from the curb, Eliza saw the black sedan start its engine. The watchers were taking the bait, following as expected. She got into her own car and joined the procession, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The drive north toward Evanston was tense. In her rearview mirror, Eliza could see the black sedan maintaining a discreet distance, never falling too far behind but not drawing attention to itself either. The ambulance ahead moved steadily through traffic, its lights on but no siren, as was typical for a non-emergency transfer. About halfway to Evanston, as they approached a major intersection, Carl suddenly activated the ambulance's full emergency lights and siren and accelerated through a yellow light, turning sharply left. Eliza followed, barely making it through the intersection before the light turned red. In her mirror, she saw the black sedan stuck at the light, its driver visibly frustrated. The ambulance continued at high speed for several blocks, then turned again, this time into the emergency bay of a small community hospital. Eliza pulled in behind it, confused. This wasn't the plan, and this certainly wasn't the address in Evanston they were supposed to go to. Carl jumped out of the driver's seat and hurried to her window. "Quick," he said. "Pull into that parking garage across the street, 5th floor. We'll meet you there." Without waiting for questions, he returned to the ambulance and began a convincing show of unloading equipment as if they were genuinely transferring a patient. Eliza did as instructed, driving to the parking garage and ascending to the 5th floor, her mind racing with questions. 10 minutes later, a different ambulance, same model but with a different service name on the side, pulled up beside her car. Carl was at the wheel, and when the back doors opened, Diane waved her over. "Clever," Eliza said as she climbed into the back, where her father lay on the gurney, seemingly unperturbed by the deception. "You switched vehicles." "Old trick," Carl said through the small window separating the cab from the patient compartment. "We've used it before when transferring high-profile patients who don't want media attention. The first ambulance will leave empty in about 20 minutes with my partner driving. If your watchers manage to get around that red light, they'll follow it to the hospice facility in Evanston, while we take a different route to your actual destination." "Will your partner be safe?" Eliza asked, concerned. "They won't bother him," Diane assured her. "They're just watching, not interfering. As long as they think Robert is in that ambulance, they'll maintain their distance." Robert stirred on the gurney, his eyes finding Eliza's. "Are we there?" he asked weakly. "Not yet, Dad," she said, taking his hand. "But we've lost our tail. We'll be there soon." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and closed his eyes again. Eliza glanced at the monitors attached to him, noting the weak but steady heartbeat, the concerning blood pressure numbers. He was hanging on by sheer force of will, she realized. Only his determination to see this through, to possibly reunite with his wife after 15 years, was keeping him alive. "How much longer?" she asked Carl. "About 30 minutes to the Thorne Institute," he replied. "We're taking a roundabout route, just to be sure we weren't followed." Eliza used the time to update Diane on everything Brant had told her, including the revelation about Adrian Cole being at the Institute. "Do you think my mother is working with him now?" she asked. "That they're both part of whatever this Thorne Institute is doing?" "It's possible," Diane said, though she looked troubled. "But if Cole was one of the men who came for her that night, if he was part of the threat, it doesn't make sense that she'd be working with him now." "Unless she didn't really escape," Eliza suggested grimly. "What if they caught her later? What if she's been their prisoner all these years?" The thought hung heavy in the ambulance as they continued their journey. Outside, dusk was falling, the cityscape gradually transforming as lights came on in buildings and along streets. They were getting close to Evanston, to the meeting that might finally provide answers to the questions that had haunted them for 15 years. Eliza's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Almost time. Remember what I said. Trust nothing you see." She showed the message to Diane, who frowned. "What does he mean by that? This Nathaniel person?" "I don't know," Eliza admitted, "but given everything else that's happened, I'm inclined to take his warnings seriously." The ambulance slowed as they turned onto a quiet street lined with mature trees. Institutional buildings, most dark at this hour, stood back from the road behind well-maintained lawns. Carl pointed to one ahead on the right, a modern structure of glass and steel set further back than its neighbors, with a discreet sign identifying it as the Thorne Institute. "That's it," he said, pulling over about a block away. "It's 7:45. Your appointment was for 8, right?" "Yes," Eliza confirmed, her heart beginning to race. "We should get Dad inside." Carl parked in the shadow of a large oak tree, positioning the ambulance so it was partially concealed from the street but with a clear view of the Institute's entrance. "I'll help you get him to the door," he offered, "but I can't go in with you. My involvement has to end here." "We understand," Diane said, squeezing his shoulder gratefully. "You've done more than enough, Carl. Thank you." Together, they prepared Robert for the short journey to the Institute's entrance. Carl detached the non-essential monitoring equipment but left the portable oxygen in place, adjusting the gurney to its lowest height for easier maneuverability. Robert was awake now, his eyes clearer than they had been all day, as if proximity to their destination had revitalized him. "We're here, Robert," Diane told him, smoothing his thin hair back from his forehead. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready for 15 years, he replied, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Let's go find Margaret." The Thorne Institute loomed before them, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the older buildings surrounding it. In the growing darkness, the glass facade reflected the city lights, making it seem as if the building itself was glowing from within. Carl helped them navigate the gurney across the parking lot toward the main entrance, Robert's frail form barely visible beneath the blankets. "This is as far as I go," Carl said as they reached the wide glass doors at the front of the building. "I'll wait with the ambulance. If you're not back in 2 hours or if I don't hear from you, I'm calling Brant." Diane nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Carl, for everything." Eliza pushed the gurney forward and the doors slid open automatically, revealing a sleek, minimalist lobby. Despite the late hour, The space was brightly lit but eerily empty. No receptionist, no security guard, no other visitors. Just a circular desk of polished white stone, a seating area with modernist furniture, and a series of closed doors leading deeper into the building. As they entered, Eliza felt a strange sensation, a subtle shift in the air pressure, accompanied by a barely perceptible hum that seemed to vibrate just at the edge of hearing. She glanced at Diane, who showed no reaction, then at her father, who was staring straight ahead with an expression of intense concentration. "Do you feel that?" she whispered to him. "Yes," Robert replied, his voice strained. "It's familiar somehow." Before Eliza could ask what he meant, one of the inner doors opened, and a tall, elegant woman with steel-gray hair emerged. She wore a simple charcoal suit that managed to look both clinical and fashionable, and her movements had a deliberate grace that reminded Eliza uncomfortably of Nathaniel. "Mr. Morgan, Mrs. Morgan, Ms. Morgan," the woman greeted them, her voice as smooth and precise as her appearance. "You're right on time. My name is Dr. Eleanor Thorne. Welcome to my institute." Eliza exchanged a glance with Diane. The invitation had mentioned nothing about a Dr. Thorne, had contained no name at all, in fact. "We were expecting someone else?" Eliza said carefully. "Yes, I know," Dr. Thorne replied with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's waiting for you, but there are some things you need to understand first. If you'll follow me, please." She turned and moved toward the door she had emerged from, clearly expecting them to follow without question. Diane gripped the handle of Robert's gurney, her knuckles white. "We go together," she said to Eliza, her voice low but firm. "Whatever happens, we stay together." Eliza nodded, placing her hand on her father's shoulder as they followed Dr. Thorne through the door and into a long white corridor. The strange humming sensation intensified as they moved deeper into the building, making Eliza's skin prickle with goosebumps. Dr. Thorne led them to an elevator at the end of the corridor, where she pressed her palm against a biometric scanner. The doors slid open silently, revealing an interior large enough to accommodate Robert's gurney comfortably. "We'll be going to the 5th floor," Dr. Thorne announced as they entered. "Our research facilities." "What kind of research do you do here, Dr. Thorne?" Eliza asked, trying to keep her voice casual despite the anxiety twisting in her stomach. "We study the boundaries of perception," Dr. Thorne replied cryptically. "The places where conventional understanding of reality bends." The elevator moved with uncanny smoothness, giving no sensation of ascent other than a slight change in the air pressure. When the doors opened again, they revealed another corridor, this one lined with doors bearing alphanumeric designations rather than names. Dr. Thorne led them to a door marked Observation Suite C and again used the biometric scanner to gain entry. Inside was a large circular room divided into 2 areas, an outer ring with comfortable seating and sophisticated monitoring equipment, and an inner chamber separated by a curved wall of what appeared to be glass. Through this transparent barrier, Eliza could see a spare white room containing nothing but a single chair. "Please make yourselves comfortable," Dr. Thorne said, gesturing to the seating in the outer ring. "I'll explain everything momentarily." Diane positioned Robert's gurney near one of the padded benches, adjusting it so he could see the inner chamber clearly. His breathing had become more labored, his skin taking on a concerning grayish tinge, but his eyes remained alert, fixed on the glass wall as if expecting his wife to materialize on the other side at any moment. "Where is my mother?" Eliza demanded, her patience wearing thin. "The invitation said 8 p.m. It's 8 p.m. We're here. Where is she?" Dr. Thorne regarded her with a clinical interest that made Eliza feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Your mother's situation is complex, Ms. Morgan. That's what I need to explain to you." "What do you mean, complex? Is she here or not?" "She is here," Dr. Thorne confirmed, her gaze shifting to include Robert and Diane. "But here is a relative term in her case. Your father may have told you that Margaret discovered something during her time with Cassandra, something that led to her apparent disappearance 15 years ago. Robert made a small sound, halfway between a gasp and a sob. "You know about Cassandra," he said. "You were part of it." "I was its director," Dr. Thorne corrected him. "Cassandra was my program, Mr. Morgan. Your wife was one of our most promising subjects." Eliza felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. Subjects? What exactly was Cassandra studying? "As I said, the boundaries of perception." Dr. Thorne moved to one of the monitoring stations and activated a screen, which displayed a series of brain scans. Some individuals possess a neurological architecture that allows them to perceive aspects of reality that remain hidden to others. Your mother was such an individual. Her ability to see beyond conventional limits made her invaluable to our research. "See beyond conventional limits?" Diane echoed. "You're talking about psychic abilities?" Dr. Thorne's expression suggested she found the term distastefully imprecise. "We prefer extended perceptual capabilities." But yes, in layman's terms, Margaret had what might be called psychic gifts. Specifically, she could perceive alternate probability states, potential versions of reality that exist parallel to our own. "Parallel worlds," Eliza murmured, remembering Nathaniel's cryptic words about spaces between worlds. "Not exactly," Dr. Thorne said. "Think of reality as a branching structure, where every decision, every quantum fluctuation creates a new branch. Most people can perceive only the branch they occupy. Margaret could perceive multiple branches simultaneously, and eventually she learned to do more than perceive them." A chill ran through Eliza as she began to understand. She learned to move between them. That's how she disappeared that night. She didn't just run away physically, she stepped into another branch of reality. "Very good, Ms. Morgan," Dr. Thorne said, with the faint approval of a teacher whose student has made an unexpected leap of logic. That's precisely what happened. The men who came for her that night were there to bring her back to Cassandra. She had been exhibiting increasingly unstable behavior, accessing classified information, making alarming statements about what she had seen in alternate probability states. We were concerned for her safety and for the security of the program. "You were concerned she would expose you," Robert interjected, his voice weak but charged with anger. "You were doing something she couldn't accept, something unethical." Dr. Thorne's expression hardened slightly. "We were pushing the boundaries of human potential, Mr. Morgan. That kind of work doesn't always fit neatly into conventional ethical frameworks." "Where is she now?" Eliza demanded, growing increasingly distressed. "You said she's here. What does that mean?" In response, Dr. Thorne pressed a series of controls on the monitoring station. The lights in the inner chamber dimmed, and the humming sound that had been present since they entered the building intensified, becoming almost painful in its insistence. "Margaret exists in what we call a probability overlap," Dr. Thorne explained as she made further adjustments to the controls. "She is simultaneously here and elsewhere, occupying a state between branches of reality. We can temporarily strengthen the connection to our branch, allowing for limited interaction, but it's not without risk, to her or to the structural integrity of the branches themselves." "You're saying you can make her appear? Like a ghost?" Diane asked, her skepticism evident. "Not like a ghost, Mrs. Morgan. Your husband's wife is very much alive. She simply exists in a state of reality adjacent to, but not identical with, our own." Dr. Thorne completed her adjustments and stepped back from the controls. "Watch." The air in the inner chamber began to shimmer, like heat rising from hot pavement. The humming grew louder, and Eliza felt a pressure in her ears, as if she were diving deep underwater. The glass wall separating the chambers seemed to ripple, its solid surface becoming momentarily fluid before stabilizing again. And then, suddenly, there was a woman sitting in the chair in the inner chamber. She appeared first as a translucent outline, then gradually solidified until she seemed as real and substantial as anyone else in the room. Margaret Morgan looked both exactly as Eliza remembered her and startlingly different. Her face was the same, the high cheekbones, the expressive dark eyes, the smile that had comforted Eliza throughout her childhood. But there was something otherworldly about her now, a luminous quality to her skin, a depth to her gaze that suggested she was seeing far more than just the room around her. "Mom?" Eliza whispered, her voice breaking. Margaret turned toward her, and her expression transformed with joy and pain in equal measure. "Eliza," she said, her voice sounding distant despite the room's excellent acoustics. "My beautiful girl, you've grown so much." "Margaret!" Robert gasped from his gurney, struggling to sit up despite his weakness. "You're really here." Margaret's gaze shifted to her husband, and tears filled her eyes. "Robert, oh my love, they told me you were dying. I had to see you one more time, no matter the risk." Dr. Thorne stepped forward, addressing Margaret through what must have been an intercom system. "Remember our agreement, Margaret. 20 minutes, no more. The strain on the probability structure becomes dangerous after that." Margaret nodded, though her expression suggested she had little respect for Dr. Thorne or her warnings. "I remember, Eleanor. Now give us privacy." To Eliza's surprise, Dr. Thorne complied, moving toward the door. "I'll be monitoring from the adjacent suite," she said. "When the time is up, I'll need to terminate the connection, regardless of whether your conversation is finished." With that, she left, the door sealing behind her with a soft hiss. For a moment, the reunited family simply stared at one another, separated by the glass wall but connected by 15 years of questions, fears, and hopes. "Is it really you?" Eliza asked finally, moving closer to the glass. "You're alive? All this time?" "Yes and no," Margaret replied, her smile sad. "I'm alive, but not in the same reality as you. It's difficult to explain." "Try," Eliza said, unable to keep a note of accusation from her voice. "Try to explain why you left us, why you let me believe you were dead, that Dad might have killed you, why you've been gone for 15 years when you could have done this before." She gestured at the room, at the technology that had apparently made this reunion possible. Margaret sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of countless worlds. "I didn't choose to leave you, Eliza. Not willingly. But that night, when those men came for me, I knew I had no choice. They weren't just going to take me back to Cassandra. They were going to eliminate me, because I had discovered something they couldn't allow to become known." "What did you discover?" Robert asked, his voice barely audible. Margaret's expression darkened. That Cassandra wasn't just studying people with extended perceptual capabilities. They were weaponizing them, using them to make subtle alterations to probability, to nudge reality in directions that served certain interests, political assassinations that looked like accidents, natural disasters that destroyed inconvenient evidence, seemingly random events that consolidated power in specific hands. "And you could see all of this?" Eliza asked, trying to comprehend the scope of what her mother was describing. "I could see the manipulations, yes, the artificial branches, the probability states that shouldn't have formed but did, because someone with abilities like mine was steering reality toward them." Margaret leaned forward, her intensity palpable even through the glass. "And I could see where it was leading, to a world where a select few controlled the very fabric of reality, where nothing was truly random or free, where every major event was engineered to serve their purposes." "So you ran," Robert said. "You crossed into another branch of reality." "It was the only way to escape them permanently," Margaret confirmed. "In my desperation, I pushed my ability further than ever before. Instead of just perceiving other probability states, I physically transitioned into one. But once I did, I discovered I couldn't fully return. I became caught between worlds, able to perceive multiple realities simultaneously, but unable to fully exist in any single one." "That sounds like hell," Diane said softly, speaking for the first time since Margaret had appeared. Margaret's gaze turned to her, curious but not hostile. "You must be Diane, Robert's wife." "Yes," Diane replied, clearly uncomfortable but holding her ground. "I've been taking care of him, especially since the cancer." "Thank you for that," Margaret said with genuine warmth. "And yes, it has been a kind of hell, seeing countless versions of reality but being unable to fully participate in any of them. Watching my daughter grow up from a distance, unable to comfort her, to explain, to be the mother she deserved." "Why contact us now?" Eliza asked. "After all this time?" "Because Robert is dying," Margaret said simply. "In every probability branch I can perceive, his time is ending. And because the Thorne Institute finally developed technology that could stabilize the connection between branches enough for this kind of interaction." She gestured at the room around her. "Eleanor Thorne was my colleague at Cassandra before she broke away to form her own research group. She's been trying to reach me for years to study my condition. I finally responded, on the condition that she helped me see my family one last time." Robert made a sound of distress, his monitoring equipment beginning to beep in warning. "Margaret," he gasped, reaching a trembling hand toward the glass wall that separated them. "I never stopped looking for you, never stopped believing you were out there somewhere." "I know, my love," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her palm against the glass, mirroring his gesture. "I've seen you searching in 1,000 different realities. Your faith has been the constant across all of them." The beeping from Robert's monitors grew more urgent, and Diane moved quickly to check his vital signs. "His blood pressure is dropping," she reported, worry clear in her voice. "The excitement is too much for him." "Dad," Eliza said, torn between staying near the glass, close to the mother she had lost, and going to her father's side. "Just rest. Don't try to talk." "No," Robert insisted, his eyes never leaving Margaret's face. "I need to tell her, need to ask." He broke off, coughing weakly. "Ask me what, Robert?" Margaret urged, her expression anguished as she watched her husband struggling. "Can you come back?" Robert managed between labored breaths. "Come home?" Margaret's expression crumpled with sorrow, and she shook her head slowly. "I can't, Robert. Not fully, not permanently. I've tried so many times, in so many ways. My consciousness is too dispersed across probability branches now. If I tried to fully materialize in your reality, I would—" She hesitated, searching for words to explain the inexplicable. "I would destabilize. My mind would fragment beyond repair. I exist in the spaces between worlds now. That's my reality." Robert's face reflected a grief so profound that Eliza had to look away. She felt Diane's hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. "There has to be a way," Eliza insisted, turning back to her mother. "This technology, what Dr. Thorne is doing, surely it could be developed further." "Eleanor's technology can create temporary windows between probability branches, allowing limited interaction," Margaret explained. "But it can't solve the fundamental problem of my dispersed consciousness. And even these temporary connections are dangerous. They create instabilities in the probability structure. Use them too often or for too long and reality itself begins to fracture." As if to illustrate her point, the air around Margaret briefly shimmered, her image becoming momentarily transparent before solidifying again. The humming sound that permeated the building crescendoed, then settled back to its previous intensity. "I don't have much time," Margaret said urgently. "There's something else you need to know, something important." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Eleanor Thorne is continuing the work that Cassandra began. She's identifying individuals with abilities like mine, studying them, preparing to use them to manipulate probability." "To what end?" Diane asked. "Power," Margaret replied simply. "Control over the direction of human events. Imagine being able to ensure that every election, every scientific breakthrough, every economic shift happens exactly as you wish. That's what they're working toward." "Then why are you cooperating with her?" Eliza demanded. Why agree to use her technology if she's continuing the work you fled from? A small, sad smile crossed Margaret's face. Because I needed to see you, and because I needed to warn you. She turned to Robert. You were right to keep Eliza away all these years. It protected her from their attention. But now that you've come here, now that they've seen her, she'll be on their radar. What do you mean? Eliza asked, a chill running through her. Abilities like mine often run in families, Margaret explained. Cassandra knew that. Thorne knows it too. They'll be watching you now, looking for signs that you've inherited my perceptual capabilities. Robert's monitors beeped more urgently, his vital signs clearly deteriorating as the stress of the situation taxed his failing body. Eliza, he gasped. You need to leave. Get away from here. I'm not leaving you, Eliza insisted, moving to his side and taking his hand. And I'm not leaving Mom, not when I've just found her again. You have to, Margaret said, her voice breaking. For your own safety. Robert is right. The door to the observation suite slid open and Dr. Thorne re-entered, her expression severe. The connection is becoming unstable, she announced. We need to terminate it immediately. No, Eliza protested. We need more time. Dr. Thorne ignored her, moving to the control panel. Margaret, you know the risks. The probability fluctuations are increasing exponentially. If we don't end this now, the damage could be irreversible. Just a moment more, Margaret pleaded, her gaze fixed on her husband and daughter. Please, Eleanor. To Eliza's surprise, Dr. Thorne hesitated, then nodded curtly. 1 minute. No more. Margaret pressed her palm against the glass again. Robert, my love, you need to know that I never stopped loving you, never stopped watching over you in every reality I could perceive. Tears streamed down her face. And Eliza, my beautiful girl, I am so proud of the woman you've become, so proud and so sorry I couldn't be there to see it directly. Mom, Eliza choked, her own tears flowing freely now. I don't understand any of this. I don't know what to do. Trust yourself, Margaret said firmly. You have more of me in you than you know, and when the time comes, you'll understand what that means. Her gaze shifted to something over Eliza's shoulder, and a look of recognition crossed her face. Ah, he's here. Eliza turned to find Nathaniel standing silently in the corner of the room, as if he had been there all along. No one else seemed surprised or alarmed by his sudden appearance. Not Diane, not Robert, not even Dr. Thorne. You, Eliza whispered. Who are you? How do you keep appearing and disappearing? Nathaniel inclined his head in that formal way she remembered from the plane. I exist in a state similar to your mother's, though I came to it differently. I perceive multiple probability branches simultaneously and can, with effort, manifest briefly in any of them. He's been helping me, Margaret explained, watching over you when I couldn't, guiding you here when it was time. Time's up, Dr. Thorne announced, her fingers moving across the control panel. The connection must be terminated now. Margaret's image began to flicker, the air around her shimmering violently. Remember what I told you, Eliza, she called, her voice growing fainter. Trust yourself and watch for the signs. I'll be with you, even when you can't see me. Mom, wait! Eliza cried, pressing her hands against the glass. You can't leave again! But Margaret was already fading, her form becoming transparent, then dissolving entirely. The humming sound peaked and then abruptly ceased, leaving a silence that felt emptier than before. She's gone, Dr. Thorne stated, shutting down the equipment. The connection has been severed. Eliza rounded on her, fury replacing grief. Bring her back. That's not possible. The probability structure needs time to stabilize before another connection attempt could be made. And even then, Dr. Thorne hesitated, her clinical demeanor slipping slightly. Even then, it might not be advisable. Each connection put strain on both Margaret's consciousness and on the boundaries between probability branches. A weak voice drew Eliza's attention back to the gurney. "Eliza!" Robert called, barely audible. "Come here!" She rushed to his side, alarmed by how rapidly his condition had deteriorated. His skin was gray, his breathing shallow and irregular, the monitors showing critical readings on multiple fronts. "Dad," she said, taking his hand, "we need to get you to a hospital." "No," he whispered. "It's too late for that. I saw her, Eliza. I saw Margaret. That's all I wanted." "Don't talk like that," Eliza insisted, though she knew he was right. The cancer had reached its endgame, accelerated by the stress and emotion of the evening. "We'll get you help." Robert smiled faintly, his eyes already growing distant. "I'm going to her," he murmured. "She's waiting for me, in the space between worlds." His gaze shifted to something Eliza couldn't see, his expression transforming with wonder and joy. "Margaret," he whispered. And then, with a soft sigh, Robert Morgan was gone. The monitors flatlined in unison, their alarms adding a mechanical counterpoint to Eliza's sob of grief. Diane moved quickly to silence them, then stood with her head bowed, her own tears falling silently. "I'm sorry for your loss," Dr. Thorne said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Would you like a moment alone with him?" Eliza nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Dr. Thorne withdrew, leaving her and Diane with Robert's body and the echoing emptiness of the observation suite. "He saw her at the end," Diane said softly after a while. "That's what he wanted most." "Yes," Eliza agreed, still holding her father's lifeless hand. "But what happens now? What do we do with everything Mom told us about Thorne, about what they're doing here?" "We leave," Nathaniel said, reminding them of his presence. "Immediately. You're in danger here." Eliza had almost forgotten he was still in the room. "Why should we trust you?" she demanded. "Because your mother does," Nathaniel replied simply, "and because I can get you out of this building without Thorne's knowledge. She's already alerted security to prevent your departure. She wants to study you, Eliza, to determine if you've inherited your mother's abilities." "And have I?" Eliza asked, suddenly remembering the single word Nathaniel had whispered to her on the plane, the word that had turned her blood to ice, that had convinced her he knew things no one could possibly know. "Amaryllis," he said, speaking the word aloud now. "Your mother's favorite flower. The name of your imaginary friend when you were 5 years old. The password you and your mother shared that only the two of you knew." "How did you know that?" Eliza whispered. "I didn't," Nathaniel said. "Your mother told me. She suspected you might have inherited her perceptual capabilities, but in a different form. She believes you can access memories and knowledge across probability branches, drawing information from other versions of yourself who made different choices, lived different lives." "That's impossible," Eliza protested. Though even as she said it, she thought of the many times in her life when she had known things she shouldn't have known, had recognized places she had never been, had felt emotions connected to events she had never experienced. "Is it?" Nathaniel asked. "How else would you explain your reaction on the plane? Your absolute certainty that I knew something no one could know?" Before Eliza could respond, the door to the observation suite slid open, and Dr. Thorne returned, accompanied by 2 men in security uniforms. "I'm afraid I can't allow you to leave just yet, Ms. Morgan," she said. "There are some tests I'd like to run, some questions about your family history that need answering." "My father just died," Eliza said, anger flaring through her grief. "I'm taking him home. Now." "I understand your loss," Dr. Thorne replied, her tone sympathetic but unyielding. "But there are larger considerations at play. Your mother's abilities make you genetically significant. The potential scientific value is not your concern," Diane interrupted, stepping between Thorne and Eliza. Her hand moved to her purse where Eliza knew Brant's gun was concealed. "We're leaving. With Robert." Dr. Thorne's expression hardened. "I'm afraid I must insist." She nodded to the security men who moved forward, hands reaching for what looked like weapons concealed beneath their jackets. "Now, Eliza," Nathaniel said urgently. close your eyes and picture your mother. Remember how she looked, how she sounded. Feel the connection between you. Without fully understanding why, Eliza obeyed, closing her eyes and conjuring an image of Margaret as she had appeared in the inner chamber, both familiar and otherworldly, both present and elsewhere. A strange sensation washed over her, like a current of electricity running just beneath her skin. The humming sound returned, but this time it seemed to be coming from within her, rather than from the building around them. "What's happening?" Dr. Thorne demanded, her voice suddenly alarmed. "What are you doing?" Eliza opened her eyes to find the room shimmering around her, the solid walls and floor seeming to waver like heat mirages. Dr. Thorne and the security men appeared frozen in place, their movements slowed to a near standstill. "You're perceiving the space between probability branches," Nathaniel explained, his form more solid and defined than everything else around them. "Like your mother, but in your own way. Take Diane's hand. Quickly." Eliza reached for her stepmother, who looked as bewildered as she felt. The moment their hands connected, the shimmering intensified, and Eliza felt a pulling sensation, as if reality itself was stretching around them. "What about Dad?" she asked, looking back at Robert's body on the gurney. "He's already gone," Nathaniel said gently. "His consciousness has joined your mother in the space between worlds. This shell is just that, a shell." Grief stabbed through Eliza, but she nodded in understanding. "What do we do now?" "You step sideways," Nathaniel said, "into a probability branch where you never came to the Thorne Institute tonight, where you're safe, at least for now." "Will I see you again?" Eliza asked. "Will I see my mother?" Nathaniel smiled, the expression transforming his formal features. "Your mother is always with you, Eliza, in every branch of probability, in every version of reality. As for me," he inclined his head, "I'll be watching over you, as I promised her I would." The shimmering intensified until the world around them seemed to dissolve entirely. Eliza felt as if she were falling and flying simultaneously, her consciousness expanding to encompass possibilities she had never imagined. Then, with a jolt, solidity returned. She was standing in her father's kitchen in Oak Park, Diane beside her, both of them gasping as if they'd run a great distance. "What just happened?" Diane asked, her voice shaking. "How did we get here?" Eliza looked around the familiar room, trying to make sense of the impossible journey they had just taken. On the kitchen table lay a single amaryllis flower, its deep red petals vibrant against the worn wood. "Mom happened," Eliza said softly, picking up the flower, "and now we have work to do." Because one thing was clear amid all the confusion and loss: Dr. Thorne and her institute posed a threat not just to her, but to reality itself. And somehow, Eliza now had the ability to do something about it, an ability passed from mother to daughter, a gift that had awakened with a single whispered word: Amaryllis. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.